The bullets quickly caught up to Feng Ping. He had no choice but to brace for impact. Then he was utterly shocked. This attack was coming from in front of him. Had the unseen enemy already gotten ahead of him? Damn, if he kept going forward, he'd be walking right into their trap. So a house. An idea struck him. There were so many villas here. If I hide inside one, how will you find me? Your attacks can't go through walls, can they? All right. He made a snap decision and charged towards a villa with an erratic, bouncing trajectory. Xiao Ran was tracking his movements. The opponent was fast, so fast that by the time Xiao Ran locked onto his trail, Feng Ping had already darted out of range, making it impossible for Xiao Ran to open a spatial gate on his path and have him walk right into it. However, Feng Ping was actually heading for a villa. That was just perfect. He continued attacking Feng Ping from behind, creating the illusion that he was chasing him, forcing Feng Ping to commit to his idea of rushing into the villa. Closer, closer, closer. Feng Ping launched himself with all his might, lunging towards a window. Got him. Xiao Ran smiled and opened a spatial gate right against the window. The spatial gate could be opened to a maximum of 100 by 100 meters, but there was no minimum limit. If Xiao Ran controlled it properly, it could be shrunk down to an atomic level. Feng Ping dived headfirst towards it. However, this androgynous fellow suddenly felt his hair stand on end. If he went any further, if he crashed through that window, he would die. A premonition of danger. But to dodge the attacks, he had already pushed his speed to the limit. How could he change direction or stop now? Just then, he suddenly thrust his hands forward. An astonishing scene unfolded. His arms stretched out to a length of over 10 meters, grabbing the trunks of 2 trees on either side, then rapidly retracted. He immediately decelerated and then stopped, mere millimeters from the window. He jerked back, his face filled with confusion. It was just an ordinary window. So, where was the danger coming from? Could his danger sense have made a mistake? But with all those incredible attacks before, his danger sense hadn't been wrong even once. What was going on? Feng Ping felt a chill run down his spine. He had never encountered such a difficult, bizarre opponent. Up to this point, he didn't even know what the enemy looked like. So, was the opponent Su Hui or not? But before he had time to ponder, whoosh, 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 dozens of bullets were already upon him. Clang, clang, clang. The bullets hit his body, but all ricocheted off, scattering on the ground. You can't kill me. Feng Ping flashed a vicious grin. My body is like a spring. It can deflect any attack. You really are Wong Luffy. Xiao Ran snarked internally, while unhesitatingly continuing his attack. Firing bullets didn't consume his powers, and as long as he had enough ammo, he could keep shooting until the end of time. Even if he ran out, so what? He could just go to the police station to resupply. If he could find an armory. Unimaginable. Feng Ping launched himself again, and finally, with a crash, he burst through a window. But before he could even catch his breath, another fierce attack came. Dozens more bullets. This was incredibly annoying, forcing him to use his powers, or else he'd be riddled with bullets. How much of his power did he have left? Not much. It was almost depleted. Why were the attacks still sticking to him like a shadow? Could it be? A suspicion arose in Feng Ping's mind, his face filled with disbelief. Was the attacker inside the villa? Otherwise, with the villa surrounded by nothing but white snow, where could they be hiding? To say the attacker was hiding in another villa was less believable than them being in this one. So, his eyes burned, his face contorted with savagery. Find this person. Little sister Su Hui. Big sister is here to find you. He regained his composure, again calling himself Big Sister, a perverted smile on his face. But just as he finished speaking, a volley of bullets riddled him, making him stumble and fall flat on his face. Damn it, damn it, damn it all. Feng Ping's face turned as black as the bottom of a pot, frighteningly dark. He swore that when he dragged this attacker out, he would subject them to the most brutal death by 1,000 cuts. Bang, bang, bang. He rampaged wildly, completely reckless, crashing through any wall he saw. So what if he demolished this villa? Find this rat. Xiao Ran couldn't help but feel a bit lucky they hadn't started this fight in a mansion. Otherwise, it would surely have been torn to pieces, rendered uninhabitable. As for this place, let it be demolished. He'd consider a loss if he felt even a twinge of regret. After taking who knows how many bullets, Feng Ping finally found Xiao Ran. First floor, a certain room. Bang. Feng Ping burst through the door, murderous intent boiling. He was already seething with uncontrollable rage. However, his eyes lit up because he finally saw someone. But it wasn't a woman, it was a man. Little sister Su-Hui, he shrieked. Xiao Ran smiled, spread his hands, and shrugged. You finally found me. All right, I lose this round. Now you go hide. It's my turn to be the cat. A game of cat and mouse? Are you kidding me? Feng Ping glared viciously at Xiao Ran, forcing out each word through clenched teeth. You think you're so witty? Thwack! He suddenly flicked his finger, and a pebble held in his hand shot out. His ability was spring, allowing him to turn any part of his body into a spring, including his fingers. Thus, this pebble was essentially launched by a high-powered spring, its speed no slower than a bullet. However, although the pebble was aimed at Xiao Ran, it wasn't aimed at his vitals. Clearly, Feng Ping hated Xiao Ran so much. How could he bear to kill him instantly? He wanted to torture Xiao Ran in countless ways, to make him wish for death. For this moment, he had endured being riddled by bullets hundreds of times. However, Xiao Ran still stood there perfectly fine, as if nothing had happened. Where's the pebble I shot? Feng Ping was baffled, but before he could think too hard, his danger sense flared up again. He had no time to think, only to activate his ability, turning his entire body into a spring. And after this time, his already dwindling power finally hit rock bottom. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Dozens more bullets shot towards him. You force my hand. Feng Ping roared, filled with fury. The bullets hit, but once again they all bounced off. But looking at Feng Ping now, he had become incredibly bizarre. His body instantly shot up by about a meter, his head almost touching the ceiling. His arms, legs, and torso also elongated. His clothes naturally ripped apart instantly, but his revealed form was neither titillating nor nauseating, but rather grotesque. Feng Ping could hardly be called human anymore. His torso, arms, legs, and neck had all transformed into springs. A person actually turned into a spring? Xiao Ran was utterly stunned. Feng Ping, however, showed no surprise. Instead, in a voice filled with bitter resentment, he said, overuse your abilities, and you'll be controlled by them in turn, becoming a slave to your powers. I've turned into a spring now, and I can never change back. Overusing abilities could lead to this. For example, if a fire ability user played with fire too much, would they also turn into fire? No, a flame human? This was so damn fantastical. Xiao Ran, curious, couldn't help but ask, how did you know? Feng Ping must have known beforehand. Otherwise, he would have been shocked and terrified at this moment, not acting as if he were giving Xiao Ran a science lesson. But Feng Ping let out a strange, cackling laugh. I've always been dissatisfied with my body, but this current one seems pretty good. If I can't change back, so be it. This state is actually better. I don't need to eat, don't need to drink, and I won't even feel the cold. Kid, go ahead and shoot me with your bullets. If I even make a sound, I lose. He had now transformed into a permanent spring form, causing him to lose all human traits, like the sense of touch, taste, and smell. Consequently, he had naturally lost most of his desires too. Sexual desire, the desire for food. Are those without desire saints? Not just saints, but also deviants. The current Feng Ping had entered an even more deviant state. He stared at Xiao Ran. Now I'm a mortal, kid. I refuse to believe your attacks are limitless, but my body is. Come eat me. I like to see who breaks first. Xiao Ran was incredibly curious. This had actually opened up a new perspective for him. So, Ho Camp was indeed using humans as test subjects. Feng Ping knowing about such side effects from overusing abilities was clearly a result of their experiments. These madmen, to think they'd even conceive of such experiments. However, the current Feng Ping seemed impervious to all weapons. How could he be killed? Spatial severing? Xiao Ran secretly shook his head. He had probed with his spatial sense. Feng Ping could no longer be called a living being. His heart wasn't beating, and his brain showed no electrical activity. Rather than a person, he had become another kind of creature. An extremely strange, bizarre creature, completely beyond human comprehension. Did it even have a vital point? Xiao Ran tried using his spatial severing, but whether he aimed for blood vessels or the brain, he couldn't cut through. It was entirely elastic. Cutting only caused deformation, and it would spring back as soon as the force was retracted. Then there was only one way. Xiao Ran smiled faintly. Did your family have too many sons, so they raised you as a girl from a young age, forcing you to wear dresses, put on lipstick, and wear pigtails, slowly turning you into a deviant? He opened a spatial gate right beside Feng Ping. Instantly, Feng Ping's danger sense went wild. Danger, danger, danger. If he took even one step forward, or even just pushed his stomach out slightly, he would be doomed beyond recovery. But where was the danger in front of him? And what kind of danger in the world was like this? However, his danger sense had proven effective before, so he didn't dare test it. Instead, he said, "You're wrong. I have 3 older sisters. My family doted on me, their son. But I hated being a man. I've loved pretty clothes since I was little, often secretly trying on my sister's clothes, even if I got beaten every time I was caught." Suddenly, the danger warning bizarrely vanished. He tentatively reached out a hand. Nothing happened. Strange. Too damn strange. Ping frowned deeply. Although the danger warning had disappeared, and there indeed seemed to be no danger ahead, had anything actually changed? He was utterly baffled. Had his danger sense really malfunctioned? He couldn't help but suspect it, because he could see clearly that nothing at all had changed before him. So, how could it be life-threatening one second and safe the next? Could it be that after I turned into Springman, my danger sense started bugging out? Xiao Ran smiled, reopened the spatial gate right next to Ping, and said, "If you like being a woman so much, why not just castrate yourself? What? Can't bring yourself to do it? TSK. Seems to me you're not that committed to becoming a woman after all." Instantly, the warning blared in Ping's mind again. Danger. Death. He couldn't even move a finger. But had anything changed? No, not in the slightest. Ping frowned, but strangely, after his complete transformation into springs, his brow would spring open when he frowned, then spring back, repeating this several times before finally settling. The danger was back? But where? Was it bugging out again? He tried to flick a pebble. As soon as Xiao Ran saw his hand move, he instantly withdrew the spatial gate and opened one close to his own body. However, Ping didn't flick this pebble at Xiao Ran. Instead, it shot off to the side. Under the impact of immense elasticity, the pebble possessed terrifying kinetic energy and embedded itself deep into the wall. Xiao Ran immediately reopened the spatial gate right next to Ping. The danger sense blared wildly. Ping was dumbfounded. The stone had indeed flown out, and he truly couldn't see any danger in front of him. Moreover, he was completely made of springs, impervious to weapons, so where was the danger coming from? It must be because I've turned into springs, but my danger sense still thinks I'm mortal flesh, hence the false alarm, he thought to himself. However, Xiao Ran dared to doubt his determination to become a woman. He flew into a rage. "You don't understand me at all, yet you dare to lecture me so shamelessly?" He wanted to rush forward and tear Xiao Ran apart, veins throbbing on his springy face. His blood vessels had only turned into springs, they hadn't disappeared. Xiao Ran added more fuel to the fire. "The way I see it, you're just a freak, neither man nor woman. You're the freaking monster. Your whole family are monsters." Ping could bear no longer and charged at Xiao Ran. The danger warning vanished. However, after he had dashed only 2 meters, the danger warning returned. But this time, Ping was thoroughly enraged, had completely lost his sanity, and no longer believed his danger sense. Without pausing, he continued to spring launch himself toward Xiao Ran. He refused to believe that in his current state, anything could threaten him. "Die," he snarled, his face contorted, but in the very next instant, his body vanished. The word "die" still echoed, as if just spoken. Phew! Xiao Ran let out a long breath, quickly ran from the first floor to the third, and vaulted over the wall to get out. The villa was about to collapse. He had finally dealt with Ping. It hadn't been easy. What was Ping's condition considered? Secondary evolution? Mutation? From a biological evolutionary perspective, this change was actually a form of progress. His life force had increased an unknown number of times over. But he could no longer be called human at all. Did he have even a shred of human traits left? Absolutely none. Xiao Ran shook his head. Even if he could transform into space itself, if the price was never being able to become human again, he would absolutely refuse. Xiao Ran had always played it safe. He cherished his life dearly. But he cherished his life as a human, not as a monster. If he were to transform into space itself, he could be invincible, unstoppable, even immortal. But what meaning would such an existence hold? It would be so dull, he probably couldn't even bring himself to end it. Therefore, he had absolutely no interest in becoming space. Besides, could he even transform into space? Using his pocket dimension didn't consume his abilities. Only spatial cutting and spatial perception did. But how could overusing those two lead to transforming into space? Take Ping, for example. He kept turning his body into springs until, eventually, his abilities were depleted, and he became completely springified, unable to change back. Never mind, I won't think about that for now. Another ability user from Hope Camp eliminated. But how many ability users did this camp have in total? How many were left? There was at least a captain. Xiao Ran didn't dare underestimate this person. To become the leader of a group of crazed ability users, this Liu Yong's strength was definitely not to be taken lightly. Whatever. I'm getting stronger and stronger, and my spatial abilities are practically game-breaking. I can't get arrogant, but there's no need to sell myself short either. After absorbing so many abilities, Xiao Ran's confidence had naturally skyrocketed. This wouldn't change his combat philosophy, which still prioritized playing it safe and using stealth. Xiao Ran began to move through the residential complex. Previously, he had stopped after finding the 9 people from Hope Camp. There was still a small part of the area he hadn't searched. He didn't care about others, but the Xia family couldn't afford to have anything happen to them, especially Xia Chuqiu. The software wasn't in his hands yet. As for the person herself, he didn't value her to the point where he couldn't bear to lose her. He went directly to the Xia family's house. As soon as he activated his spatial perception, his brows furrowed. There were still 2 people in the Xia house, but one was alive and one was dead. The dead one was Xia Lingsheng. He must have been dead for some time, because the villa's generator hadn't been turned off, and the air conditioning was tirelessly working, maintaining an indoor temperature of around 5 degrees Celsius. Even so, lividity had appeared on Xia Lingsheng's body, and it was quite severe. Xiao Ran wasn't a professional medical examiner, but he knew Xia Lingsheng had definitely been dead for a day or 2. The living one was Xia Chuqiu, hidden in a secret room. The secret room was small. She was sitting on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, her head buried between her legs, as if asleep. Xia Lingsheng was dead. Xiao Ran couldn't help but sigh. He truly respected retired veterans from the bottom of his heart. They were heroes who had defended their country. Xiao Ran didn't want to be a hero because he knew he couldn't be one, but precisely because he couldn't, he admired them all the more. Those bastards from Hope Camp really deserved to die. Xiao Ran climbed in through a window, went to the secret room, and knocked on the wall. Xia Chuqiu, it's Xiao Ran. Inside, Xia Chuqiu immediately sat up, her pretty face stained with tears. She hesitated for only a moment before decisively opening the door. The door was very well hidden. If it weren't well hidden, she wouldn't have been able to hide from the Hope Camp gang. By the time Xiao Ran arrived, he likely wouldn't have seen her. She would have either been taken away directly or violated on the spot, a fate worse than death. In the apocalypse, beautiful women were a valuable resource, but also a fragile, consumable one, easily broken and discarded. Xiao Ran, Xia Chuqiu cried, throwing herself into his arms. Grandpa's dead. Sob sob, Grandpa was killed by those bad men. Xiao Ran held this almost perfectly beautiful woman, yet, rare for him, he felt no stirrings of lust. People have empathy. Xia Chuqiu was grieving for Xia Lingsheng's death, and Xiao Ran also felt a deep sense of sorrow over it. This shared emotion led to a rare moment where Xiao Ran felt no inappropriate desires. He patted Xia Chuqiu's back. I've already killed a few of those bastards, and it won't be long before I kill every last one of them. This was the absolute truth. He and Hope Camp were now mortal enemies. If he didn't wipe out everyone in that camp, Xiao Ran himself wouldn't be able to sleep soundly. Really? Xia Chuqiu lifted her head, looking at Xiao Ran with shining eyes. MHM. Xiao Ran nodded emphatically. Thank you, Xia Chuqiu said in her most serious tone. I only know programming. So whatever kind of program you need, I'll create it for you. Let's not talk about that now. Let's bury your grandfather, Xiao Ran sighed. Okay. Xiao Ran went to dig a grave, while Xia Chuqiu went to take one last look at her grandfather. Before long, Xiao Ran had dug a pit in the snow. Then he went back inside to find Xia Chuqiu. Xia Chuqiu burst into loud sobs. She truly couldn't bear to part with her grandfather. In the end, Xia Lingsheng was buried, right there in the snowy plains. Perhaps the snow would never melt, or maybe it would take decades, even centuries. So, even if they wanted to move Xia Lingsheng's grave, it would be a matter for the distant future. Returning to the villa, the two looked at each other, speechless. After a long while, Xiao Ran finally asked, how exactly did you predict the cataclysm would occur? This time, Xia Chuqiu didn't hide anything. Not only can I program, but I'm also a red hacker. Before the cataclysm, hackers from American organizations tried to infiltrate our country's classified files. I participated in the defense, and, as a result, I unexpectedly saw a top-secret document. Xiao Ran couldn't help but raise an eyebrow, but didn't speak. This document detailed an analysis of those cosmic rays and made several predictions, none of which were good outcomes. All of them were major disasters, Xiao continued. After research by the highest levels of the government, they decided to secretly implement Project Human Seed. It was only after reading this document that I had Grandpa tell everyone to stockpile supplies, to make everyone believe Grandpa. I fabricated a new identity for him. Anyway, people usually only knew Grandpa was a retired soldier, but they weren't clear on his specific status. At first, everyone was skeptical, but when the cataclysm hit, everyone became convinced of Grandpa's fake identity. Unexpectedly, it was a mistake that turned out for the best. It even managed to intimidate the Chong family. She still felt a lingering fear, as she knew a bit about the Chong family. After the cataclysm, with social order collapsed, who could stop the Chong family from doing whatever they pleased? But the intimidating false identity she had concocted for Xiao Lingsheng had actually scared them off. Touch Xiao Lingsheng, and the eastern military region would rain down missiles to level the area. Weren't you afraid? The Chong family was clearly afraid. Even if they had their suspicions, would they dare to test it? Try it, and they might just end up dead. Unfortunately, while such a false identity could intimidate the relatively sane Chong family, it couldn't scare off those lunatics from Hope Camp. Most importantly, those lunatics didn't live here. Kill you and I'll just run? Even if you level the place with missiles, can you still chase me down? The Chong family was unwilling to abandon such a prime location as the Chong family estate. Otherwise, they too could have easily killed someone and then just walked away without a care. Xiao Ran and Xiao talked for a very, very long time. The night was already deep, but Xiao felt no sleepiness at all. Finally, Xiao Ran had to say, "It's getting late, go to sleep now." But Xiao looked at Xiao Ran with a pitiful gaze. "I dare not sleep. As soon as I close my eyes, I see Grandpa, and I think about how I'll never see him again." Xiao Ran couldn't help but sigh. This girl had told him her parents died in an accident when she was very young, so she had been raised single-handedly by Xiao Lingsheng. Now, her only remaining relative had been killed. She was naturally heartbroken. Moreover, for the past few days, she had been forced to hide in the secret room, too scared to come out, unable even to retrieve Xiao Lingsheng's body for burial. This, of course, added to her immense guilt. "It's okay, I'll stay here with you." Xiao Ran led her into her bedroom and had her lie down, still fully clothed. As expected, Xiao slept restlessly, glancing at Xiao Ran every now and then. At least an hour passed before her eyelids gradually grew heavy, her eyes opening less and less frequently, until she finally drifted off to sleep. Xiao Ran couldn't help but touch his lips. When did I become such an upright gentleman? A great beauty is lying right in front of me, and I can actually restrain myself? He looked at the sleeping Xiao. Her pretty face was flawlessly beautiful, which should have made his lust flare, but his heart was surprisingly calm. I guess I still have a tiny bit of humanity left, not to take advantage of someone in distress. He never considered himself a good person, but he hadn't done anything truly evil either. For instance, this time, although he had killed everyone from Hope Camp who attacked, his original intention wasn't to avenge Xiao Lingsheng. On the contrary, Hope Camp had attacked so quickly entirely because he had off number 114. Of course, given Hope Camp's ambition, their practice of scouring places for living people to experiment on, it was only a matter of time before they reached here. And with the way those lunatics operated, even if none of their people had died here, would they have listened to reason? They deceive if they could, and kill if they couldn't. Beautiful women might be abducted. After all, the lunatics themselves might not be interested in women, but they had a large group of ravenous, wolf-like underlings. There were two reasons why Xiao Ran hadn't made a move on Xiao. First, he already had many top-tier beauties at home. Although he wouldn't mind adding another, he wasn't desperately horny. Second, Xiao was a rare software talent. She could even hack into national-level servers, which showed just how incredible she was. Although most electronic devices were currently down, some were still functional, and Xiao could put her skills to use. No rush. He would take his time. Now that she was all alone, could she possibly escape his clutches? Saying it like that makes me sound like a bad guy, doesn't it? Heaven knows, I swear, while I'm not a good person, I don't go out of my way to do evil. If others don't provoke me, I can't be bothered with them. Otherwise, with such powerful abilities, shouldn't I be ambitious, recruit a large group of subordinates, and become a lawless local tyrant? The nation's power probably hasn't completely disappeared. Since the government issued that classified document, what does it mean? Even if it was hasty, the government still made preparations. Perhaps somewhere, in some corner, there are hidden national forces always ready to act for reconstruction. But in the current environment, How could the army mobilize on a large scale? There were 6 to 7 meters of snow on the ground. Snowmobiles and the like could pass, but what about heavy trucks or even tanks? And trains? They couldn't move at all. Shovel a path? Feasible, yes, but how long would that take? It would be even slower than traveling on foot. So one must keep a low profile. When national power reemerges later and settles old scores, which nail that sticks out wouldn't get hammered down. But there's a very serious problem. Metahumans. No matter how much the government prepared, did they ever anticipate the emergence of metahumans? When metahumans appear in the army, if such a person is ambitious, couldn't they quietly grow stronger, expand their influence, and then suddenly seize power? One person might not be enough, but what about 2, 3, or even more metahumans? Xiao Ran sighed. Even if the nation's power was hidden, as time went on, this world would inevitably fall under the control of metahumans. Forget it. Why think so much? I'll just take it one step at a time. As long as I become stronger and stronger, no one can even think of affecting my life. If one comes, I'll take down one. If a group comes, I'll take down a group. Xiao Ran was indeed gradually gaining such confidence. For example, he could now open a spatial gate up to 100 by 100 meters in size, and keeping the spatial gate open didn't consume his powers. So, if he kept it open above his head 24/7, even if enemies threw a nuclear bomb at him, it would just be swallowed whole by the spatial gate. Of course, if someone dropped a nuke in the nearby area, letting the high temperatures, massive explosions, and dangerous radiation surge over, that would still be incredibly dangerous. So, I need to shape the spatial gate into a sphere as soon as possible. That way, I truly won't fear any person or any faction. Grandpa! Suddenly, Xiao Chuchio cried out, her face drenched in tears. She looked at Xiao Ran and said miserably, Xiao Ran, I don't have a grandpa anymore. With that, she burst into loud wails. Xiao Ran could only gently pull her into his embrace, patting her fragrant shoulder to comfort her. After a while, Xiao Chuchio fell deeply asleep again, but this time, something was wrong with her condition. She had a fever, a high one. Xiao Ran took out a thermometer gun and checked. It was actually 42 degrees Celsius. For an adult, a fever of 40 degrees Celsius is already very dangerous, and hers was 42. Xiao Ran quickly tried to give her fever-reducing medicine, but Xiao Chuchio had completely lost consciousness and couldn't swallow it at all. Xiao Ran, naturally, had no inhibitions. He first put the medicine in his own mouth and then fed it to Xiao Chuchio. Romantic? He didn't feel it because he was kissing scorching hot lips. There was no way to feel any sensuality. After feeding her the medicine, he took out a cold towel and applied it to Xiao Chuchio's forehead, changing it every so often. Now, you'll have no choice but to pledge yourself to me, Xiao Ran muttered to himself. However, Xiao Chuchio's high fever showed no signs of subsiding at all. This woman had very likely witnessed her grandfather's death, but hadn't dared to cry out in grief, holding it in for more than a day before finally releasing her sorrow. Coupled with the complete lack of rest during this period, and later running outside to bury Xiao Lingsheng and catching a chill from the cold wind, it was quite normal for her to catch a cold and develop a fever. When a person is weakened, illness naturally takes advantage. Sickness arrives like an avalanche, but leaves like pulling silk. Xiao Ran shook his head. He had done what he could. Next, it would all depend on Xiao Chuchio's own resilience. He left the Xiao family home, then took out Feng Pingping's corpse, absorbed her powers, discarded the body, and went to Guomei Yao's place. After absorbing powers, one always needed someone to help digest the side effects, right? The size of the space portal remained unchanged, but its casting range had increased to 10 meters. Xiao Ran could only call it bizarre. The improvement of this ability was the most inexplicable, impossible to figure out. Just when Xiao Ran thought he'd grasped its pattern, it would willfully change, leaving him speechless. In contrast, the enhancements to his spatial sense and spatial cut had stabilized, both increasing by a range of 3 meters. So, Feng Pingping must have absorbed 2 ability sources, and adding his own, it was equivalent to the strength of 3. Roughly, after leaving Guomei Yao's place, Xiao Ran left some food and water and returned to the Xiao household. Xiao Chuchio was still unconscious. Her high fever persisted, and she had started talking deliriously. Sometimes she'd call out for Mommy and Daddy, other times for Grandpa, but she called for her grandpa more often. It couldn't be helped. She had lost both her parents when she was 8, so in her memories, her grandfather's image was the most profound. She was sweating profusely, her hair matted together, and her pretty face was flushed a deep crimson. You could even see the heat in her breath. Damn, was this fever going to fry her brain? If her brain got damaged and she regressed to the mental age of a 5 or 6-year-old, then even if she had an adult body, Xiao Ran wouldn't be able to bring himself to, what if in the middle of that she suddenly blurted out something like, "Uncle, this thingy is so strange." Wouldn't that just scare it limp instantly? He used his spatial sense to observe her, the enhanced version. Of course, it wasn't to check out Xia Chuchio's figure. He even phased through her skin. He discovered that Xia Chuchio's heartbeat was rapid, and her blood flow was astonishingly fast, at least twice his own. Her neural activity was also incredibly high, like a telegraph machine, tapping nonstop. Was this what a high fever was like? Xiao Ran had no idea. This was the first time he'd observed someone with a high fever since gaining his spatial sense. In a daze, he fell asleep, then jerked awake suddenly. Checking his phone, it was just past 2 a.m. Xia Chuchio was still lying in bed, her face flushed, her hair damp, her condition no different from before. Why wasn't the fever medicine working at all? Nevertheless, Xiao Ran gave her another dose. Since Xia Chuchio couldn't swallow on her own, he inevitably had to give it to her mouth-to-mouth again. But it was the same. Xia Chuchio's body was alarmingly hot, making it impossible to stir any interest in Xiao Ran. Unable to fall back asleep, he couldn't help but think about his own abilities. How could he further enhance his combat power? Spatial sense was out. Although it was a god-tier skill, it had no offensive capability. He had to rely on spatial cut and space portal. But the power of spatial cut was determined by the strength of his ability, and as for space portal, he still couldn't manage to warp it. So, how could he increase his combat strength without increasing his ability's intrinsic power? Perhaps in a few days, or even tomorrow, he would have to face those ability users from Hope Camp, especially that Liu Yong. Xiao Ran really wasn't confident. After all, he'd never encountered them before. Therefore, the more he could boost his combat power, the better his chances would be. After thinking for a long time, Xiao Ran's eyes suddenly lit up, and he smacked his forehead. I'm a damn genius. No, I'm an idiot. How did I only think of this now? He went to the 3rd floor, positioning himself as high as possible, almost touching the ceiling. Then, with a thought, the space portal opened 10 meters above his head, its maximum current range. Immediately, a large batch of stones shot down from the sky, like a torrential rain of rocks. The stones fell incredibly fast. These were already kinetic stones, possessing a speed of nearly 20 meters per second. Falling from a height of 10 meters naturally accelerated them further. Xiao Ran then quickly opened another space portal right against the ceiling. As the stones re-entered this portal, they were, of course, accelerated again. This added the kinetic energy converted from 10 meters of potential energy. It didn't seem like much, but what was the key? Xiao Ran could do it again. Once, twice. Countless times. Of course, leaving aside the fact that air resistance would impose a speed limit on the stones, just the act of Xiao Ran releasing the stones and then reopening a portal below to catch them involved a reaction time. After all, it was only 10 meters. Once accelerated to 100 meters per second, covering 10 meters would take only 0.1 seconds. He could react in 0.1 seconds, but what about 0.01 seconds? Thus, the speed of the kinetic stones was doubly limited. Xiao Ran tirelessly accelerated the kinetic stones. Anyway, opening and closing the space portal didn't consume any ability power. Come on, come on. After more than 500 repetitions, the first batch of stones reached supersonic speed, approximately 340 meters per second. This was also Xiao Ran's limit. Any faster, and he wouldn't be able to catch them. He didn't dare risk it. If he failed to catch them, the stones would crash down on him. The roof will be useless. Even though he had been strengthened multiple times, how terrifying were these kinetic stones now? Consider this. Even a supersonic bullet could easily pierce a human body, assuming it didn't hit bone. So what about a stone moving at supersonic speed, weighing hundreds, even thousands of pounds? A single impact would guarantee that bones were completely pulverized into dust. Although he'd done it over 500 times, not much time had passed because the stones fell faster and faster. As they approached supersonic speed, wasn't each cycle of sending and receiving taking only a few hundredths of a second? Xiao Ran touched his forehead. It was drenched in sweat. He was so tense. The slightest mistake, and he'd be smashed into pulp. Finally, it was done. After a short rest, Xiao Ran decided to do another batch. This time, it was kinetic rebars. 2 hours later, Xiao Ran truly couldn't take it anymore and collapsed into sleep. He was utterly exhausted, mentally and physically. Can't take it, can't take it. However, a smile played on Xiao Ran's lips. Supersonic stones. Who could have imagined? Who would dare to test them? So what if they were physical-type espers? Faced with such kinetic stones and rebars, could they still tank it head-on? If they try to dodge, I'd just make the attack rain down from the sky over a 100 by 100 meter area, an indiscriminate bombardment. Could a physical-type esper possibly escape that? Of course, he'd have to clear a safe spot for himself, so he wouldn't end up crushing himself. That was easy, a mere thought for him. Awesome. This is awesome. Spatial abilities truly were the strongest. They only seemed weak before because my methods of developing them were wrong. And now, if the space portal could be open 100 meters, 1,000 meters, or even 10,000 meters away, couldn't I accelerate the kinetic stones to 10 times, even 100 times the speed of sound? So the space portal does have growth potential. I was just too stupid before to figure out how to use it. Come at me. Let's see how I deal with you all. I Xiao Ran, guarantee it. This was Xiao Ran's last thought before he completely fell asleep. West Mountain Sanatorium. A man with a buzz cut stood before the toppled administration building. It was none other than the Evolved who had committed the murders at Sioux University. Captain, we've made inquiries. The Evolved individual wore a helmet the entire time. We couldn't get a clear look at his face. A tall, lanky man spoke. Upon closer inspection, his eyeballs were an unsettling lizard-like hue, and his eyelids blinked horizontally, not vertically like a normal person's. Clearly, he too was an Evolved. He had only undergone his transformation less than 2 months ago, yet his body had already developed such grotesque changes. Snake-like? Lizard-like. The man with the buzz cut was Liu Yong, the true decision-maker of Hope Camp. He frowned, his gaze sweeping over the ruins again. So, you're saying the enemy has leveled our main base, yet we don't have a shred of information about who they are? Nearby, a woman with striking features, but an expression as cold as ice, chuckled. We only lost one building. Most of the structures are still intact. So, I wouldn't say our main base has been leveled, would you? It was, of course, a deadpan joke, yet it drew the gazes of several others. What was the most crucial part of Hope Camp? The Underground Research and Development Center. Now the administration building had collapsed, and the Underground R&D Center had been blown up with it. So, their main base hadn't been destroyed? Your joke isn't funny in the slightest. But these were all madmen. Madmen, of course, had a peculiar way of thinking. So, they merely glanced at her, refraining from rebuking her for the ill-timed jest. Liu Yong didn't turn his head, his expression unchanged. Take a head count, he said flatly. See if anyone went missing after the incident. Oh, so boss thinks the culprit infiltrated the camp by pretending to seek refuge, then launched a surprise attack in the dead of night, destroyed the administration building, and ambushed Tai Tu and his group. The lanky man exclaimed, a look of dawning comprehension on his face, though it didn't make him appear any brighter. His name was Wu Ming. He was, naturally, also a test subject, now a high-ranking figure in Hope Camp. The glacial woman countered. Or perhaps the culprit is extremely cautious. After causing all this mayhem, they're still hiding among the survivors, waiting for us to return so they can strike again. Her name was Zhu Shui, a name that aptly reflected her personality, as cold as snow, as unyielding as ice. But everyone saw the culprit flee. Wu Ming insisted, trying to reason. Zhu Shui shot him a look one might reserve for an imbecile. Fled? They could have easily circled back. If they're evolved, how difficult would it be to slip past the notice of ordinary people? But Liu Yong cut their bickering short. First, ascertain if anyone is missing. Then, kill everyone here. If the culprit is hiding among them, they'll be forced to reveal themselves. Brilliant, boss. The captain's still the smartest. Several of the evolved chimed in with sycophantic laughter. Killing people? What did it matter? Slaughtering them all? So what? Conducting experiments was so simple now. They didn't even need the equipment from the Underground Research Center anymore. Just exposing someone to the liquid formed from the toxic hailstones was enough. Those who survived the exposure would become evolved. Those who didn't would either die or remain as they were. And so, the group proceeded to interrogate the camp survivors. After more than half an hour, they gathered their findings. We found bodies for all the dead, except for one person who seems to have vanished in a thin air. His name is Xia Guang, about 178 centimeters tall. This is his sketch. A man in his early 30s handed over a piece of paper. The sketch on it was unmistakably Xiao Ran. The resemblance was uncanny. Before becoming a test subject here, this man had been an artist, a sketch artist who specialized in drawing portraits of criminal suspects for the police, no less. However, exposure to countless criminal cases had taken a heavy toll on him. to the point where he developed criminal impulses himself. He had come here for clinical trials, hoping the drugs developed at the facility could help control his urges. Unexpectedly, not only was he not cured, but his malevolent thoughts spiraled out of control. This man's name was Luzwa. Wu Ming exclaimed. This looks just like the Xiao Ran the folks from Qingfeng Garden were talking about. What do you mean, looks like? Zhu Shui said, icily. It is him. Exactly the same. She had always disdained dim-witted people and couldn't resist a jab. Damn it. Are you looking for a fight? Wu Ming finally snapped. Zhu Shui spread her legs slightly, her voice a taunt. Can you even handle it? To everyone's surprise, Wu Ming considered it, then actually shook his head. Nope. You're too much for me. Who would have guessed that beneath Zhu Shui's icy demeanor lay an insatiable libido? Otherwise, she wouldn't have volunteered as a test subject here in the first place. Forget him. Even their physically formidable captain probably couldn't satisfy this woman's peculiar appetite, he mused. Seeing the conversation straying, Lu Yong grunted, his sharp gaze sweeping over them. Xiaoguang is undoubtedly Xiao Ran. After killing number 114, he must have realized 114 had contacted us. So, he needed to relocate to evade us, then adopted a new identity to infiltrate our camp and destroy our main base. I must correct you. Zhu Shui couldn't resist interjecting, her insistence unwavering. We only lost one building. It hardly counts as our entire base being demolished. It couldn't be helped. Could anyone who volunteered to be a test subject truly be considered normal? Lu Yong pretended not to hear. Arguing with her on this point would be an endless endeavor. He continued in a grave tone. Yaran has been out of contact for nearly a day. He's most likely been killed too. He went to Qingfeng Garden, mentioned an evolved there named Su Hui, a woman. Therefore, we must prepare for the possibility that Xiao Ran has at least two evolved with him. It's quite clear. Xiao Ran is male, Su Hui is female. Since both have been sighted at Qingfeng Garden, it's highly probable they're working together. Boss, are we heading to Qingfeng Garden? Luzwa asked. Lu Yong didn't hesitate. Yes, of course we're going, but we can't go recklessly. We know far too little about this enemy, and we've already lost several of our own. We must be exceedingly cautious. Xiao Ma, he addressed the young man. You'll take a drone and scout ahead first. The young man's name was Ma Hui. His evolved ability was the control and enhancement of machinery. Ordinary drones wouldn't be able to take off in these harsh conditions, but after his modifications, they could. Not only that, they could fly far beyond their standard operational range. Yes, Captain. Ma Hui responded promptly. Lu Yong then turned to the others. Kill everyone left here. We can't risk Xiao Ran having accomplices still hiding among them. Better to kill 10,000 innocents than let a single target escape. Yes, sir, they all responded in unison. Moments later, screams echoed throughout the sanatorium. The place transformed into a slaughterhouse, blood soaking the ground, the metallic tang of it heavy in the air. But in less than half an hour, an eerie silence descended. Captain, it's done. Lu Yong nodded. We'll head to East Mountain, find a place to hole up. Let Xiao Ma conduct drone reconnaissance first. We move once we have a clear picture of the situation. His followers were instantly eager, practically rubbing their hands in anticipation. This Xiao Ran had killed so many of their number. He deserved to die 1,000 deaths. Although there was no genuine affection among them, they were merely a band of former test subjects united by circumstance. Xiao Ran had dared to target them. That made him their common enemy. The group set out, leaving the decimated camp behind as they headed towards East Mountain. Over half an hour later, they reached East Mountain. They chose a hotel perched on the summit, offering a commanding view of a vast area, including a partial glimpse of Qingfeng Garden. Ma Hui immediately launched 10 drones. All were coated in white, providing excellent camouflage in the current environment. Whirring loudly, the drones ascended and flew off in the direction of Qingfeng Garden. Xiao Ran sat with his eyes closed, resting. He hadn't slept more than a few hours the night before. Even though his body was far stronger than an ordinary person's, there were limits to how much he could push himself. Buzz. Every 30 seconds, he would send out a spatial perception pulse. The energy consumed and recovered during that interval kept things in perfect balance, so his power remained at full capacity. Suddenly, his senses sharpened. Drones. 2 drones had entered the range of his spatial awareness. Immediately, he activated full surveillance mode. A 3rd drone briefly entered the edge of his perception, only to retreat quickly. That made the total number of drones unclear. Xiao Ran's first thought was that the people from the camp were finally here. After all, he had killed Feng Pingping. Of course, they'd send someone to check it out. This time, they seemed more cautious. Instead of sending people in directly, they'd opted for reconnaissance via drones. Xiao Ran pondered his options. Should he stay hidden and pretend he wasn't there? Or should he deliberately provoke them into attacking? He wasn't particularly worried about a fight here. The terrain wasn't open. There were villas scattered every few hundred feet, which might be obstacles for others, but for him, they were perfect cover. Attacking through walls or around corners was nothing for him. Still, he was a little concerned about Lu Yong. As a physical-type ability user, Lu Yong could charge straight through anything, destroying obstacles with brute force. Going up against someone like that meant either a long, tense standoff or an instant life-or-death clash. No in-between. Xiao Ran, are you ready for a fight to the death? He asked himself quietly. Then, his gaze turned resolute. If he killed Lu Yong and his crew, he'd become the undisputed top-tier ability user in Suching. No one would even come close. Right now, in the early stages of the apocalypse, it was still relatively easy to kill other ability users. But give it a few months, and they'd start forming factions, raiding, expanding, fighting over territory, manpower, and powers. Going solo against an entire group at that point? Forget it. Unless you had overwhelming strength. If he didn't grow stronger now, he'd be forced to bow to others in the future. Besides, he had just secured a massive cache of sonic stones and sonic steel rods last night. With those weapons, what was there to be afraid of? Fight! Xiao Ran's mind surged with determination. A spatial gate opened above the rooftop. Bang! Bang! 2 shots rang out, and both drones were instantly blasted from the sky. In the distance, Ma Hui frowned. Captain, I've lost 2 drones. The rest of the group didn't panic. In fact, they looked thrilled. That could only mean one thing. Xiao Ran and Su Hui were likely hiding in Qingfeng Garden. They've got some nerve, someone sneered. Killed our people and still think they can hide there. If they've got a death wish, no one can save them. Captain, let's move in and finish them. The group was bloodthirsty and confident. With the captain leading the charge, what did they have to fear? Lu Yong turned to Ma Hui. How were the drones taken out? Ma Hui closed his eyes. His eyeballs twitched violently under his lids as he accessed the drone footage. After a moment, he said, bullets. Bullets? Someone scoffed. He's supposed to be an ability user, and he's using bullets? Must mean they're weak, Wu Ming said dismissively. If they had strong abilities, why resort to guns? Zhu Shui, ever ready to challenge him, retorted. That monster said Su Hui's ability is liquid control. Obviously, drones aren't within a range. As for Xiao Ran, his power is still unknown. Maybe he's like the captain, close combat type. If he's afraid of revealing himself, using a firearm makes perfect sense. You can't judge their abilities just from that. Damn it. Wu Ming glared at her, but Zhu Shui just looked smug, like she dared him to do something about it. Wu Ming instantly lost steam. Lu Yong mulled things over. Send all drones to the last known crash site. Spread them out. I want to know exactly where those shots came from. Suddenly, a flurry of buzzing filled the air. 8 more drones took off. Xiao Ran raised an eyebrow. The snake had been startled, but they still weren't committing, still trying to probe with drones and learn more about his abilities. These drones flew high and fast, zigzagging through the sky in overlapping patterns, clearly designed to evade attacks. Trying to figure out my power? Fine. Xiao Ran grinned and fired a shot. 1 drone spiraled to the ground, smoking. He kept firing. 2 down. 3. 4. In just 10 seconds, all 8 drones had been shot out of the sky. He was cunning. He fired all the shots from the same window. 10 seconds. 8 bullets. Every one of them a direct hit on moving aerial targets. That could only mean one thing. He was a top-tier sniper. Sure enough, Ma Hui immediately relayed the intel. 10 seconds, 8 bullets. All drones hit while in motion. No ordinary shooter could manage that, Luz was said. His ability must be sniper-related. All the shots came from the same window, Ma Hui added. He's definitely a sniper, Luz concluded, and he's the only shooter. Zhu Shui couldn't help herself. What if? He wants us to think that. Everyone rolled their eyes. If you're going to nitpick like that, what's the point of even discussing? Still, all eyes turned to Lu Yong. He was their captain, their strongest fighter, and the one they all followed without question. Lu Yong rubbed his temples. Regret flickered in his eyes. If only he hadn't killed all those people from the camp. They could have been used as cannon fodder. Give them guns, push them forward. Xiao Ran and Su Hui wouldn't stay hidden for long. But then again, how else could he be sure none of them were Xiao Ran spies? He looked forward, expression proud and cold. So you're hiding in there? Huh, now that we know where you are, you think we can't kill you? Let's go. Time to take them out, he said calmly. No one questioned him. Liu Yong's power far exceeded any of theirs. It took at least 4 of them working together to stand a chance against him. With Liu Yong leading and them backing him, what was there to be afraid of? So what if the enemy was a sniper? Liu Yong stepped forward, holding a boulder the size of a house. The snow couldn't support its weight, and both he and the rock sank deep into the ground. Undeterred, he pushed the boulder forward, carving a long trench through the snow. Lu Zhua and the others followed behind the rock, making their way toward Qingfeng Garden. Ma Hui deployed 3 more drones, keeping them just above the massive stone to act as guides. Pop! One drone suddenly fell from the sky, smoking from a clean hit. A second drone followed a second later, then a third. Each one was shot through the body, dropping like a rock, smoke trailing from the wreckage. Ma Hui looked resigned. "Captain," he said to Liu Yong, "I'm not sending out the drone. I can't bear to lose it." Liu Yong nodded. "Once we're closer to the villa, try to hack into their electronics, especially the surveillance system." "No problem," Ma Hui guaranteed. "Captain, they have a sniper," Zhu Shui asked. "Are we going for a direct assault? Or something else?" A cruel grin spread across Liu Yong's face. "A little closer, and I'll hurl this boulder. We'll smash that villa to bits and force those 2 out. And if they don't run, then we'll just crush them." They'd tested it before. Even if their targets were reduced to pulp, their powers could still be absorbed. That was all they were after. Hiv. The group sneered. Kill, kill, kill. Their bloodlust was surging. Though they hadn't even seen their opponent yet, they already considered Xiao Ran their most dangerous adversary, one who had to be eliminated at the first opportunity. Liu Yong pushed the massive boulder forward steadily. His strength was absurd. The ground was icy and slick, offering little friction, but this boulder had to weigh over 10 tons. Anyone else would be lucky to even budge it. Liu Yong wasn't worried. If the enemy saw the boulder blocking their sniper's line of sight, they might just reveal themselves. The moment they did, his chances of victory would skyrocket. Rush in, take them down. Simple. Sure enough, a figure vaulted out of a window. A man. He wore a helmet, obscuring his face. If Xiao Ran's group was just 1 man and 1 woman, this had to be Xiao Ran. Su Hui's whereabouts were less certain. She could be in the villa or not. There was no rule saying they had to stick together. Xiao Ran sprinted towards another villa ahead. Crash! He shattered a window and dove inside. Why run here? Xiao Chuqiu was still in the first villa. He didn't want to fight to break out there, risking her getting caught in the crossfire. He figured that by drawing their attention, Liu Yong's group wouldn't risk storming the first villa. What if it was an ambush? What if it was empty, a deliberate trap? So, keeping it under surveillance while focusing all their firepower on Xiao Ran, divide and conquer, was surely the smarter move. And indeed, he saw the giant boulder rolling towards him. Does this guy think we're slow pushing a boulder? Trying to escape like this? So naive. Our captain's a physical powerhouse. His strength and stamina are beyond anything this fool can imagine. Lu Zhua and the others sneered. Only Zhu Shui, always one to argue, piped up. But what if he knows we'll think that, and is deliberately luring us in? Everyone rolled their eyes. Ma Hui retorted. What's he going to do? Have the villa rigged with explosives to blow us all up when we get there? His words made everyone freeze. Even Liu Yong stopped pushing the boulder. It was a possibility they couldn't ignore. What if Xiao Ran had planted landmines in the snow? Previously, such a concern would have been laughable, but times had changed. Getting their hands on landmines or explosives wasn't out of the question. Liu Yong eyed the distance, then grinned. Close enough. Time to flush this rat out. He suddenly exerted his full strength, actually heaving the massive boulder into the air. Go, he roared. Whoosh. The boulder flew towards the villa like a cannonball. A metaphor, of course. Its speed wasn't truly that of a cannonball. The group watched with cold sneers. When that massive boulder hit, the villa would surely be demolished. Even if the rat wasn't crushed, he'd be injured, or at least forced to flee. Suddenly, in a blur, another massive boulder came flying from the villa, heading straight for Liu Yong's projectile. Boom! With a deafening crash, the 2 boulders collided and exploded, shattering into thousands of fragments that rained down in all directions. Not good. Liu Yong roared instantly. Lu Zhua didn't even have time to reply before thrusting his hands towards the sky. The 2 boulders had indeed collided and shattered, but it was obvious Xiao Ran's projectile had been faster. Thus, even though it had been pulverized, hundreds of fragments still rained down on them. The larger pieces were head-sized, the smaller ones like ping-pong balls. But at that velocity, even a ping-pong-sized fragment packed a terrifying punch. Thud, thud, thud. The debris rained down, only to be deflected by an invisible wall, bouncing away harmlessly. Lu's face, however, paled slightly. His power was a force field, capable of protecting or trapping. He just shielded all 7 of them, and the effort, while manageable, had clearly taken a toll. All 7 were unharmed, but their faces were grim. Even Lu Yong had lost his arrogant demeanor, his expression turning deadly serious. That's Xiao Ran. He's a physical-type power user, Zhu Shui said, her voice laced with bitterness. A physical type was one thing, but the key was he was even stronger than Lu Yong. How could they tell? The boulders said it all. Lu Yong's projectile had been completely neutralized, its forward momentum gone. Yet, fragments from Xiao Ran's still came crashing down. That was a display of raw power, undeniable and impossible to fake. How terrifying was a physical-type power user? One look at Lu Yong told the story. Why else would this band of psychos follow him? It was precisely because he was so overwhelmingly strong that they willingly acknowledged him as their boss. Against such a terrifying opponent, what chance did they have? And even if Xiao Ran couldn't beat them, he could easily escape. Would they dare give chase? Chase him? Their speeds varied too much. They get separated and picked off one by one. And if they stuck together, could they even keep up with Xiao Ran? Whoosh! Just then, another massive boulder launched from the villa, hurtling towards the 7 of them. Lu's was scrambled to raise his force field again. Crash! The boulder slammed into it, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. This time, there was no counter-throw from Lu Yong to mitigate the impact. A multi-ton boulder, moving at incredible speed, the destructive force was immense. Lu's would desperately maintain the force field, but it drained his powers completely in less than a second. The boulder still came down, though its velocity was greatly reduced. Lu Yong roared, leaped into the air, and caught the boulder. He landed and set it aside. But the faces of all 7 turned ashen. That single attack had taken Lu's Wu out of commission. If Xiao Ran through another boulder, how would they stop it? Retreat! Lu Yong ordered decisively. The 7 of them scrambled back, running for their lives. Whoosh! 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 More boulders rained down, thick and fast. Lu Yong and his crew were terrified. They didn't have the luxury of wondering how Xiao Ran could hurl multi-ton boulders with the frequency of machine gun fire. All they could think about was saving their own skins. Since Xiao Ran had already made his move, how could he possibly let these people go? He immediately gave chase. However, even he hadn't anticipated such a result. He had only launched 2 sonic stones, and the enemy had crumbled, knowing only to flee. Could it be a feigned retreat, a ploy to lure him out? Xiao Ran briefly considered this possibility, then decisively pursued them. He couldn't let them escape. If he failed to annihilate this group this time, they probably wouldn't dare face him head-on again. Instead, they'd lurk in the shadows like vipers, waiting for an unguarded moment to strike. Xiao Ran had no desire to be constantly on someone's hit list. So, he thought, all right then, please just die today. At this point, he couldn't care less about exposing the secret of his abilities. With a slight pause, a spatial gate opened, and 3 more sonic stones shot out. Whoosh, 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 speeding towards Lu Yong and his 6 men. Sonic stones, naturally, earned their name by reaching sonic speed. 340 meters per second. And how far was Xiao Ran from Lu Yong's group? Less than 100 meters. So, it would only take about 0.3 seconds for these 3 stones to catch them. That fast. Could Lu's still use his ability? No, not a drop of energy was left. Captain, Lu's roared. He had no time for explanations. That one shout was to inform Lu Yong that his energy was depleted, and he could no longer manifest his force field. Lu Yong's mind raced. What to do? Among the 7, only Lu's ability was defensive. The others weren't suited for it. If it was attacking, they were all skilled, but for defense, they were utterly inadequate. He had to make a choice. Gritting his teeth, Lu Yong shot out his hands, grabbing one person in each, and then erupted with his full power. Zoom! He shot forward. In the blink of an eye, he'd put distance between himself and the other 4. He was a physical-type ability user, after all, and the number of abilities he'd absorbed far surpassed the others. His strength was unparalleled in Hope Camp. If he didn't need these subordinates to do his bidding, he would have definitely absorbed all their abilities by now. One always needs some useful underlings, right? Previously, he had to slow down for Lu Zhuo and the others, but now, with their lives on the line, he naturally unleashed his full power. Boom! Behind him, shattered snow scattered like a waterfall like mist. The 2 he took with him? Lu Zhuo and Ma Hui. Lu Zhuo had his force field, and Ma Hui could control electrical appliances. They were the most useful to him. So, if he could only take 2, he naturally chose the most valuable. As for Zhu Shui and the other three, they could only watch in despair as Liu Yang's trio departed. Before they could react further, the three stones struck, and they vanished instantly. Their abilities were completely useless against such a terrifying attack. Liu Yang glanced back. Xiao Ran was already catching up fast. He had to abandon the tempting thought of going back to absorb their abilities. It could cost him his life. If he died, what good would all those absorb abilities be? He'd just have to spit them all out anyway. He could only give up, pained. Still, his heart was bleeding. His original plan was to eliminate Lu Zua and the others and absorb their abilities for himself after his faction grew strong and powerful. But things hadn't even gotten off the ground before Hope Camp was dismantled, blasted, and bombed by Xiao Ran. Now his subordinates were dropping like flies, one after another. So much regret. If he'd known, he should have taken them out himself. Then Xiao Ran wouldn't have benefited. Damn it! Lu Zua and Ma Hui both yelled. They, of course, didn't know Liu Yang's selfish thoughts. In that critical moment, Liu Yang really could only save two people. There was no time for careful consideration. Xiao Ran caught up. He reached out, pressed down, and a large rock instantly vanished. He pressed again. Amidst a pile of blood and flesh, a warm current suddenly surged into him. He breathed a sigh of relief. Even when they were crushed to this extent, he could still absorb their abilities. Strange, he mused. In what way, in what form, do abilities actually exist? Curious, he continued to collect the stones, or rather, the remnants, and absorb the other three abilities. Although there were only 4 people, in terms of quantity, it should be around 10 strands of ability. Clearly, these 4 had all absorbed abilities before. However, his spatial gate showed no change. It neither expanded nor increased its casting range. But the maximum range of his spatial perception and spatial cutting both increased by 10 meters. This indirectly proved that the 4 individuals' abilities indeed amounted to about 10 strands. And Xiao Ran finally felt that sensation again, as if something inside him was about to sprout. He was going to gain a new power, but he was still just a tiny bit short. He wondered if absorbing one more ability, or perhaps a bit more pressure, would be enough. Pursue. Xiao Ran quickly switched to his skis, pushed off with his poles, and sped after Liu Yang's trio. His current strength was already immense, packing the power of at least 2,500 kilograms. And though the full boost from absorbing the abilities of Zhu Shui's group would take 2 or 3 days to fully register, even now, a single push of his poles sent him flying forward at astonishing speed. Ahead, Liu Yang's trio kept looking back. When they saw Xiao Ran merely press down and a large rock, almost the size of a person, vanish into thin air, their eyes widened in disbelief. It was incredible. How could it just disappear? Could Xiao Ran's ability be pulverized, capable of breaking objects down to an invisible size? Bang! Just then, another stone projectile shot over. Sonic speed. Liu Yang quickly veered. Despite carrying 2 people, his speed and agility were unaffected. Physical type ability users didn't have flashy abilities. They just had great strength and speed, which in combat were among the most powerful assets. Boom! The stone landed, blasting a large crater in the snow and sinking deep within. Liu Yang's brow furrowed. Wrong. Completely wrong. He had seen it clearly. That stone had appeared out of thin air, just like the previous 3 stones had vanished. He's not a physical type ability user. Liu Yang finally realized, if Xiao Ran were physical type, even if he were 10 or even 100 times stronger, he couldn't make stones vanish and reappear from nothing. Spatial ability. Ma Hui yelled in agreement. It was the only possibility. But could a spatial ability also launch stones like bullets? Liu Yang had no time to ponder. He could only keep running, because if he slowed even slightly, he'd be hit. Given the terrifying kinetic energy of the sonic stones, a single hit would pulverize even his enhanced physique. Regardless of why Xiao Ran, a spatial ability user, could launch stones, Liu Yang couldn't fight him head-on. What else could he do but flee? He ran. Xiao Ran chased. Before long, Lu Zua and Ma Hui began to shiver violently, their faces frighteningly pale. It was too cold. They no longer had number 54's feathers. Even though their physiques were stronger than normal people's, at best they could endure the severe cold for an extra 10 minutes. Now, they had reached their limit. But with Xiao Ran hot on their heels, could they possibly stop and find shelter from the cold? Liu Yang's expression turned grim. Suddenly, his grip on both men tightened. Crack! Crack! 2 sharp sounds echoed. Even if Lu Zua and Ma Hui had sensed the danger, they would have assumed it was Xiao Ran attacking. How could they possibly have guessed it was their own captain? Once a melee-type Esper attacked at close range, who could possibly stop them? An instant kill. So Lu Zhuo and Ma Hui died instantly, without even a chance to register their shock. Lu Yong's expression remained unchanged, cold-blooded and composed. Two warm currents surged into him simultaneously, and his speed instantly skyrocketed. He casually tossed the two corpses aside. With his powers now boosted and two burdens shed, his running speed naturally exploded. Even though Xiao Ran, chasing from behind, was on a snowboard, Lu Yong quickly widened the gap between them. Xiao Ran caught up to the spot and then stopped. Still hoping, he touched the bodies of Lu Zhuo and Ma Hui, but felt only icy coldness. No warm current flowed into him. As expected, Lu Yong had absorbed their powers. What a ruthless man! Realizing Lu Zhuo and Ma Hui were on the verge of freezing to death and would only become liabilities, he had decisively finished them off. This way, he not only gained power, but also rid himself of two burdens. Decisive, resolute, cold-hearted. In an apocalypse, individuals like him were the epitome of ruthless ambition. How could Xiao Ran possibly let him go? Even if it weren't for Lu Yong's powers, they were now mortal enemies. Xiao Ran had to eliminate Lu Yong to have peace of mind. Otherwise, wouldn't he have to live in constant fear of Lu Yong launching a sneak attack on his base? How could he live a normal life then? But why had he stopped? Because it was too damn cold. He was an ice aspect, capable of ignoring the severe cold, nor fire aspect, able to generate his own heat. He certainly wasn't a melee type with a physique monstrous enough to withstand the biting chill or endure it for a day or two. He was only slightly stronger than an ordinary person, well, perhaps a few dozen times stronger. Besides, Lu Yong had likely already guessed his ability type, so Xiao Ran no longer bothered to conceal it. He pulled out his hovercraft and resumed the pursuit. However, Lu Yong was already incredibly fast. After this brief delay, he had long since vanished from sight. It didn't matter. He couldn't see the man, but Lu Yong had left a trail of footprints. He wasn't worried about losing the trail. True, Lu Yong was much faster, but in this snowy terrain, it would be incredibly difficult for him to completely shake Xiao Ran. Most importantly, there were only 2 hours left until dark. Once darkness fell, Lu Yong would be running around like a headless chicken and eventually forced to stop. And Xiao Ran? He could still give chase, using the footprints as his guide. How could he fail to find him then? Night was his domain. He would be the undisputed king. He followed the footprints. However, after a short pursuit, Xiao Ran saw a dense forest ahead, and Lu Yong's tracks led directly into it. So, Lu Yong had realized his footprints would give him away. Lu Yong must have thought, if I slip into the woods and emerge elsewhere, how will you find me then? Xiao Ran smiled. He didn't enter the forest, but instead circled around its perimeter. Found him. At the southwest corner of the dense forest, he spotted fresh footprints. The chase continued. Gradually, the sky darkened, and a thick fog began to roll in. Almost in an instant, the fog grew so dense you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It was as if the world itself had hit pause. No one could venture out. Exposure to such dense fog and extreme cold meant certain death. Xiao Ran activated his spatial sense and pressed on with the chase. The maximum range of his spatial sense was now 38 meters. How could he possibly lose the trail now? Still, Xiao Ran pursued for over another hour until, at long last, the footprints led into a building up ahead. Lu Yong was inside that building. 99% certain. Not a full 100%, because what if Lu Yong had been on the roof and made a mighty leap, landing his footprints 100 meters away? In that case, Xiao Ran would have to circle the perimeter to check. However, with his spatial sense, that 99% instantly became 100%. Lu Yong was inside the building. Xiao Ran stored away his hovercraft. He didn't waste time on smug remarks or useless chatter. He attacked immediately. Swish, swish, swish. 15 sonic stones shot out simultaneously, hurtling towards the building. Leaving no blind spots, he aimed to demolish the entire building in one fell swoop. Boom! Rumble. Amidst the colossal roar, the entire building instantly crumbled, kicking up a sky full of dust. Xiao Ran! Lu Yong's enraged roar thundered out. He burst out from the rubble. He didn't possess the formidable healing abilities of No. 114. However, melee-type espers inherently had enhanced physiques. At his current level of power, even tanking bullets wouldn't significantly harm him. After all, if that mutated husky could manage it, he certainly could. It was just that those sonic stones were far too terrifying. Even he couldn't fully withstand their impact. The currently collapsed walls and broken beams? Trivial. What truly astounded him was that Xiao Ran had actually managed to track him down. How had he done it? How could Xiao Ran navigate so freely in this dense fog? Your ability is just too outrageous. He spun around frantically, now facing east, now west, completely clueless as to Xiao Ran's location. This was the plight of a melee-type esper, a severe lack of ranged attack options. Still, he quickly devised a plan. He snatched up some bricks and began hurling them in all directions. Swish, swish, swish. Hood, hood, hood. Even if the bricks missed their mark, they would make a sound hitting a wall or the ground. All except for one direction. Lu Yong stared in that direction, though he still couldn't see a thing. But Xiao Ran had to be in that direction. The other party must have caught the brick, preventing any sound of impact. How did you find me? He yelled. Swish. A steel rebar was his answer. A sonic rebar. Damn it all. Lu Yong couldn't see a thing. Furthermore, sonic meant the sound of the rebar tearing through the air arrived at the same instant as the rebar itself, making it impossible to dodge by ear. He could only rely on his precognitive danger sense. He quickly executed a clumsy roll, narrowly dodging the sonic rebar. Damn it! Lu Yong was furious enough to start swearing. Why was Xiao Ran so calm? Why wasn't there the slightest hint of smugness or pride from him? You're already toying with me like a cat with a mouse. Why are you still being so devious? Are you that much of a coward? Come out. If you're a man, face me head on, he roared, constantly taunting. All right, Xiao Ran chuckled. Swish, swish, swish. 3 more steel rebars shot out from the fog. Damn it! Lu Yong cursed under his breath, forced to leap aside and dodge frantically. However, he instantly sensed intense danger once more and hastily halted his charge. Though he couldn't see a thing ahead, he had a gut feeling that moving forward even an inch would mean utter annihilation. He didn't know why, but he trusted his intuition. Xiao Ran smiled faintly. You're quite spry, aren't you? Then try this on for size. With a mere thought, Xiao Ran unleashed a volley of sonic rebars. They flew out in a dense barrage, covering a 20 by 20 meter area. Let's see you dodge this. The danger sense screamed. Lu Yong lunged again, but even as he moved, the intense premonition persisted. The danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Swoosh! A steel rebar shot towards him. With no other option, Lu Yong was forced to intercept it. As expected of a physical-type esper, his movements were lightning fast. He actually managed to catch the rebar, but its kinetic energy was immense. His grip couldn't halt its momentum. Instead, the friction nearly tore the skin from his palms. Lu Yong quickly leaped back, yielding to the rebar's inertia. Finally, he wrenched it to a stop, a mere half-inch from his chest. Cold sweat beaded on Lu Yong's forehead. A rebar moving at supersonic speeds was far more terrifying than a bullet. In fact, one was like facing hundreds of bullets at once. He wasn't afraid of a single bullet, but hundreds simultaneously? That was a nightmare. Clap, clap, clap. Applause rang out. Xiao Ran chuckled. Impressive, truly impressive. Blocking bullets is one thing, but you even managed to stop my supersonic rebar. You really are strong. As he spoke, dozens more rebars shot out in a volley. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Lu Yong, with no other recourse, unleashed his full power, snatching at them purely on instinct. He caught them again, but even as he immediately recoiled with their momentum, the act of catching and holding the rebars inevitably shredded his palms. The first barrage had left the making. This one tore them open. Blood dripped, his hands a mangled mess. Swoosh! The third wave of supersonic rebar arrived. Lu Yong roared, whirling the rebar he held with ferocious speed. He couldn't catch them with his bare hands anymore. Doing so would strip the remaining flesh from his palms. Clang! Clang! 2 sharp impacts. By using the rebar as a staff, Lu Yong avoided direct contact, but it also presented a larger target. The collisions sent jarring vibrations up his arms, numbing the web of his hand and nearly splitting it open. Nevertheless, he managed to fend off this wave too. But before he could even catch his breath, his danger sense screamed again. He was about to use the rebar to defend when a massive boulder suddenly materialized in front of him. Block that with rebar? Like hell he could. The sheer weight and kinetic energy of the boulder were incomparable to the rebar. If he dared try, the rebar would be driven straight through him before the boulder crushed him to a pulp. His only choice was to abandon the rebar and leap back. But his leap wasn't fast enough. As the boulder bore down on him, he had no choice but to raise his arms to defend. Bam! The moment his arms made contact, a terrifying impact force shot through his bones. Crack, crack, crack. Every bone in his body seemed to groan in protest. An ordinary person's bones would have shattered instantly. But Lu Yong was different. His bones were far more resilient. They didn't break, didn't shatter. Puffed, puffed. Instead, the horrific force drove both his arm bones straight through his skin and flesh, jutting out gruesomely. Ar. Lu Yong let out an earth-shattering scream. Those were his own bones, not sharp but blunt, dislocated and forced through his own flesh. The pain must have been unimaginable. Drip, drip, drip. Blood poured from the wounds. Lu Yong's arms hung limp and useless, but he had no time for pain or despair. He spun around and fled. Path or no path. He had to run, or Xiao Ran would kill him. In his current state, he didn't even have a chance to fight back. Running was his only hope, however slim. His advantage? Speed. He was now certain Xiao Ran was a space manipulation esper, not a physical type. Therefore, he could definitely outdistance him. Thud, thud, thud. His luck was out. He slammed headfirst into a wall, but he didn't flinch or dodge, just plowed straight through. His impact blasted a hole in the wall, and he kept running. With a few more crashes, he burst through another wall and back outside, sprinting wildly into the dense fog. Xiao Ran gave chase. He had to admit, Lu Yong was damn fast. Even after several barges of supersonic rebar, Lu Yong had managed to escape. He was out of range of Xiao Ran's spatial senses. No matter, Xiao Ran thought. Bloodstains, footprints. He won't get far. Xiao Ran took out a hovercraft, hopped on, and resumed the chase. After chasing for just over half an hour, he found Lu Yong in a building. The man's condition was critical. His arms still hung uselessly, but the bleeding had stopped. The intense cold had frozen the wounds. Lu Yong was slumped on a sofa, gasping for breath, his face deathly pale. He lost a lot of blood. Even for a physical-type esper with robust vitality, such blood loss was devastating. He wasn't immortal, after all. Without warning, Lu Yong dived to the side. Clang! A rebar impaled the spot where he'd been sitting, punching straight through the sofa. The sheer kinetic energy caused the sofa to explode into a shower of debris. He'd found him again. A look of despair crossed Lu Yong's face. He thought he'd lost Xiao Ran. How could he have been tracked? The fog outside was impenetrable. As the one fleeing, he'd run blindly, with no regard for direction. So how had Xiao Ran followed him? Could he see through the fog? He must. Otherwise, finding him twice would have been impossible. Lu Yong gave a bitter smile. He had made a terrible miscalculation. If he'd known, he should have fought Xiao Ran with everything he had before the fog set in. If he could just get close, he was confident he could take down anyone in an instant. But now, he had no idea where Xiao Ran was, leaving him a sitting duck. No, I have to risk it, Lu Yong thought. A ferocious look appeared on Lu Yong's face. To hell with it, I have to go all out. If I don't, Xiao Ran will just wear me down and kill me. If I fight, there's a chance, however slim. He began to move in a serpentine pattern, pushing his speed to its absolute limit, darting towards the direction the last attack had come from. This erratic movement would make it harder for Xiao Ran to target him and, hopefully, increase his own chances of spotting his attacker. It was the best he could do under the circumstances. A sneer touched Xiao Ran's lips. All that fancy footwork, he mused, is useless against my spatial perception. Spatial cut. He slashed out with an invisible blade. Ugh, Lu Yong grunted, his face contorting in pain. He'd sensed the danger and instinctively ducked, but it felt as if a knife had viciously gouged his mind. The pain so intense tears welled in his eyes. What kind of attack was that? A chill ran down Lu Yong's spine. Xiao Ran's attacks were too bizarre, too varied. Bullets, boulders, rebar. And now, an invisible attack. How was he supposed to defend against that? If not for his danger sense, he'd probably have died several times over by now. Swoosh! Another massive boulder suddenly flew out of the fog, hurtling towards him with crushing force. Lu Yong scrambled to dodge again. However, his injuries inevitably hampered his agility. Arg! He screamed as a stone grazed his left foot. A sonic speed stone. How terrifying was such a graze? A large chunk of flesh was gouged out, revealing stark white bone. Cold sweat drenched Lu Yong's forehead. It was partly from the pain, partly from fear. A few more hits like that, and all the flesh would be torn from his leg. Would he even be able to stand then? If he couldn't dodge, facing Xiao Ran's attacks meant only waiting for death. Beg for mercy. If their roles were reversed, would he accept an opponent's surrender at this point? No one was a fool. The only option left was a desperate, life-or-death struggle. The problem was, he couldn't even see Xiao Ran. How could he fight for his life if he didn't know where to strike? Only by facing death head-on can one hope to survive, he thought. When the next wave of attacks came, he would charge recklessly in that direction. It was his only chance. Here it came. Whoosh! 3 steel rebars shot towards him. Liu Yong gritted his teeth and charged towards one of them. Puffed. The rebar pierced through his lower abdomen, tearing out a large amount of flesh and blood, which instantly sprayed into the air. But Liu Yong's forward momentum barely faltered. He gathered all his strength into his right leg. If he could just see Xiao Ran, he would unleash a whip kick and obliterate him. Thump! He landed. Even though he couldn't see Xiao Ran, he kicked out repeatedly. If he couldn't see, so be it. His opponent had to be roughly in this position. Kick him to death. But he threw 17 kicks, and every single one hit nothing but air. Xiao Ran wasn't here? How could that be? The rebars had clearly shot from this direction. Not far away, Xiao Ran sneered. The spatial gate could open up to 10 meters away from him. You want to use that to deduce my position? Too naive. He was about to strike again when he paused, slightly surprised. What was happening? Previously, he had absorbed a large amount of power and had already felt a new ability stirring within him, just lacking a little something to fully awaken. But after this fierce battle, the feeling had grown stronger and stronger. It had now reached a critical point. It's here. He reached out his hand, locking onto Liu Yong with his spatial perception. Then, with a mere thought, Liu Yong suddenly froze. It wasn't that he was simply standing still. In reality, his left leg was raised high, and his right foot was about 2 centimeters off the ground. But whether it was 1 centimeter or 2, he was indeed suspended in midair, as if he had escaped gravity. What a bizarre scene. Liu Yong himself was stunned. Why can't I move? And I was clearly in mid-stride, my right foot off the ground, and my left yet to land. So why haven't I fallen? Then, he immediately realized this was Xiao Ran's doing. Hadn't he become a sitting duck? He would die. He roared, kicking out with both feet. Xiao Ran frowned. Indeed, after locking onto Liu Yong, he had used his new ability to, how to put it, it was as if he had thrown Liu Yong into another dimension. That was why Liu Yong, despite being airborne and in motion, was bizarrely suspended. This dimension was a 5 by 5 by 5 meter cube, quite large. Casting it out was like throwing a net that ensnared Liu Yong. Otherwise, he would have almost no chance of capturing a physical type ability user moving at full speed. With a thought from Xiao Ran, this dimension immediately shrank. But once it conformed perfectly to Liu Yong's form, it couldn't shrink any further, so he couldn't crush his opponent to death this way. Maintaining this state consumed a massive amount of his powers. It would be depleted in half a minute at most. This ability was called Banishment, Spatial Banishment. Xiao Ran smiled. As long as his powers weren't depleted, the target couldn't break free. Awesome. He tried shooting a kinetic rebar. However, when the rebar reached Liu Yong, it bizarrely flickered and emerged from behind him, as if he wasn't there at all. Spatial Banishment. It exiled a person to another dimension. So, attacks from normal space naturally couldn't harm Liu Yong. Doesn't that make this skill useless then? No, it's useful. Look at Liu Yong. He was merely thrown into another dimension. But clearly, unlike the void dimension his spatial gates led to, this one wouldn't cause death. What did this mean? Xiao Ran could use banishment on himself. Then, what attack could possibly harm him? This was an absolute defense. Unlike the spatial gate, which could only block one direction, this could truly achieve an omnidirectional absolute defense, making him immune to any attack. Even, what about a nuclear blast? No matter how powerful, could it break through a spatial barrier? Moreover, it only lasted half a minute now, but if he absorbed more powers, couldn't it last for a minute, 2 minutes, or even longer? Xiao Ran let out a breath. He finally had an absolute defense ability. Let your death celebrate my new power. Xiao Ran smiled, opened a spatial gate in front of Liu Yong, and then deactivated banishment. Liu Yong instantly returned to his previous state, lunging forward. Then, he immediately vanished. He'd entered the void dimension. Xiao Ran smiled faintly. By capturing the target with spatial perception and then banishing them, he could leisurely open a spatial gate. Even if the opponent had a danger sense, they wouldn't have time to react and could only obediently charge into the spatial gate. Open a spatial gate directly? He could hardly capture a physical type ability, user moving at full speed that way. He could only open the gate far away, allowing the opponent to sense it with their danger sense and calmly stop or change direction. But now, even if Liu Yong had a danger sense, with a spatial gate opening right in his face, could he still stop or change direction? Go back. Hurry back. It had been several hours since he started absorbing powers, and the side effects were making him extremely uncomfortable. But to kill Liu Yong, he had to continue the pursuit instead of returning to find women. If he missed this chance, Lu Yong would definitely hide and ambush him. So, he forcefully suppressed his desires. He had to finish Lu Yong. Finally, he returned to the hovercraft and started heading back, following his tracks. The return trip was much faster. Just an hour later, the hovercraft arrived back at Qingfeng Garden. Xiao Ran rushed directly to Guo Meiyao's place. His eyes were bloodshot, and his veins seemed to bulge as if they were about to explode. Ooh, MPH. Over an hour later, Xiao Ran finally regained his composure. He wasn't fully satisfied, but the fundamental urges were no longer critically affecting him. There was still Lu Yong in that void dimension, though. Looking at Guo Meiyao again, she probably couldn't take any more. She might actually die. Forget it. There were other women in the residential complex. He got dressed, left the villa, and then retrieved Lu Yong's body. With a touch, a warm current flowed in, powers acquired. Damn, so strong, so strong. The likes of Lu Zhua and that crazy woman had only absorbed 2 to 3 units of power. But Lu Yong, he had the equivalent of 15 or 16 units. Of course, this included what Lu Yong had absorbed from Lu Zhua and Ma Hui. But even removing those, the amount of power this person had absorbed on his own was likely around 10 units. This comparison highlighted Lu Yong's strength. The spatial gate ability hadn't changed at all, seemingly having reached its limit. However, the maximum ranges for spatial perception and spatial severing had reached 60 meters and 53 meters, respectively. As for banishment, he hadn't tested its limits yet. No hurry for that. Xiao Ran entered another villa. He had previously noticed 2 women there. A little over an hour later, Xiao Ran left the villa. He felt relieved. All the side effects had been resolved. With a slight smile, he returned to the villa where Xia Chuqiu was. By now, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. The long day had finally passed. However, when Xiao Ran checked on Xia Chuqiu, she was still running a high fever, showing no signs of improvement. Around 10 o'clock, she regained consciousness for a while. Xiao Ran fed her some congee and milk and also gave her some fruit. She needed to eat. Otherwise, she'd starve or die of thirst. He didn't stay any longer. Instead, he moved Xia Chuqiu to a hidden room, left some bread and fresh water, and then departed. He couldn't focus all his energy on Xia Chuqiu alone. Now that the Hope Camp situation was resolved, his place had become a paradise once more. So he could bring back all the goddesses and continue to enjoy a life of abundance, even luxury, in this post-apocalyptic world. Time to go. He took out his hovercraft. However, his first stop wasn't the Qinghong building, but the Jufu residential complex, to resupply by Rue and the others. Things like food, fresh water, and even sanitary pads. He was quite thoughtful. He also refueled the generator and, of course, recharged the women a bit too. They're a bunch of enchantresses, I tell you. Xiao Ran mused as he boarded the hovercraft and headed for the Qinghong building. He had to admit, professionals were professionals. Simply no comparison at all. He arrived at the Qinghong building in high spirits. Although Su Qingmei and the others had only been separated from him for 4 days, they had spent those 4 days on tenterhooks, worrying what would become of them if Xiao Ran perished out there. Amidst their anxieties, Xiao Ran finally returned. The whole family rejoiced. Xiao Ran took them back to Qingfeng Garden. However, the journey was quite long, and by the time the 10 of them reached the mansion, only another half hour had passed before night fell. A dense fog rolled in, so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Xiao Ran had already reinstalled the generator and lit a fire in the fireplace, making the entrance warm and cozy. The family enjoyed a wonderful dinner together. Xiao Ran then announced that Su Qingmei and Zhou Yunsu had performed exceptionally and were ranked first tier, akin to the principal consorts of old. Han Yun and Su Xinran were second tier, titled noble consorts. Yunwan Tong, Jiang Yuning, and Wang Lulu were in the third tier. Finally, Zhong Lei and Zhang Jingyao were in the fourth tier. This wasn't about a difference in status, but in treatment and provisions. The higher the rank, the more and more valuable the daily supplies they received, including but not limited to fruits, skincare products, and so on. However, they all still ate together. There was no segregation for meals. Xiao Ran merely wanted to encourage them to be more proactive, so apart from the differences in material allocations, he made no other distinctions for now. He'd see how this went. This outcome naturally pleased Zhou Yunsu the most, though the fact she wasn't the sole empress filled her with a competitive spirit. She resolved to surpass Su Qingmei and claim the top spot for herself. At that moment, the mansion returned to its former liveliness. Figures reappeared in the yoga room and swimming pool, and some peculiar sounds could be heard once more. The night passed. Day 54 of the apocalypse. Xiao Ran gazed out the window. As the sun rose, the dense fog began to dissipate rapidly, as if controlled by an invisible hand. Only 54 days? He found it hard to believe. It felt like such a very long time. Checking the date, it was already July 24th. Normally, this would be around the hottest time of the year. What was one most afraid of when going out? The sun. The sunlight was too harsh. But now, Xiao Ran longed more than anything to see the sun again. He looked up, but the sky was a dull, leaden gray, clearly covered by thick clouds. So if one wanted to see the sun, they'd probably have to go into space, to a space station, for example. Speaking of space stations, Xiao Ran couldn't help but think of our astronauts. He remembered news reports saying there were 6 astronauts on our space station. How are they doing now? Xiao Ran shook his head. It was too far beyond his reach. Even if he wanted to rescue them, what could he possibly do? He stopped thinking about it. It would only cause him unnecessary worry. Xiao Ran went to check on Xiao. She was still running a high fever. But aside from her high temperature, her vital signs were surprisingly normal. Moreover, when she occasionally woke up, she was lucid and didn't speak nonsense, so her brain hadn't been damaged by the fever. How strange. Wait. Xiao Ran paused, a thought striking him. The birth of superhumans. He guessed that humans needed to first come into contact with the toxic hail. If they didn't die immediately, they would develop a high or low fever. After surviving that, there was a very, very small chance they would awaken an ability. Was it equivalent to a kind of evolution? So, was Xiao undergoing this process? But she couldn't have come into contact with the toxic hail, could she? She had been in the villa the whole time. Even when she went out briefly to bury Xiao Lingcheng, Xiao Ran had only dug a shallow pit in the snow, not deep enough to reach anything, so it was impossible for her to have touched the toxic hail. This contradicted what Xiao Ran understood so far. So, he was back to square one. Was Xiao just having a normal fever? No, that wasn't right. Xiao Ran gently tapped his fingers on the table. What caused this extreme weather? Unknown cosmic rays. That was the source, the origin of all these changes. So, theoretically, if a person was exposed to these rays, would the effect be any different from direct contact with the toxic hail? At most, one might be a smaller dose, the other a larger one. Perhaps the cosmic rays have been affecting us all along, accumulating in our bodies just very, very slowly, taking a long time to reach a critical point. And Xiao, having lost her only relative, suffered an emotional breakdown. Could that have pushed her past the critical point? So is she truly evolving? If she succeeds, she'll become a superhuman. If she fails, will she die? Or just remain an ordinary person? Let's just keep observing her. Xiao Ran wrapped Xiao tightly in a quilt from head to toe, even tucking in many heat patches to ensure she wouldn't freeze to death during transport. Then, he carried the bundle back to the mansion. Seeing Xiao Ran return with such a strange bundle, all the women ran over out of curiosity. When they discovered it was a woman inside, and a peerless beauty at that, so stunning it took their breath away, they all looked at Xiao Ran. Your eye for beauty is just too sharp. Xiao Ran just smiled. She might be evolving. Evolution. Su Qingmei and the other 8 women exclaimed. Xiao Ran nodded and shared his theory. The women were stunned. They had believed that the evolved were favored by heaven, the luckiest individuals who had emerged after the cataclysm. But Xiao Ran was saying it was an acquired trait. As long as one was hit by the toxic hail or exposed to enough cosmic rays, anyone could have the chance to evolve. Of course, he added, the success rate of evolution is pitifully low. 1%, 0, 1%, or even lower. So, according to your theory, even if we stay indoors all day, we're still being affected by cosmic rays. Eventually, we'll accumulate enough to trigger our evolution. Su Qingmei asked. Xiao Ran nodded. It's possible. The 9 women reacted differently. Han Yun and Wang Lulu were frightened, while Su Qingmei and Zhou Junsu were eager to try. Su Ran and the others were undecided. It all came down to their individual personalities. If evolution fails, will we die? Han Yun asked, her voice trembling. Xiao Ran thought for a moment. I don't know. He had wanted to conduct experiments earlier, but that crazy woman had interrupted and everyone involved had died. Han Yun and some of the other women shivered in fear. The crucial point was, if the condition for triggering evolution was being hit by the toxic hail, that would be manageable. They could simply stay indoors. But if it was cosmic ray exposure, that seemed to be everywhere, there would be no escape, no hiding. Once a certain amount accumulated, the evolution process would begin automatically. Xiao Ran considered this. I'll conduct more experiments to increase the success rate of evolution. If this evolution process was inevitable, he hoped all 9 women would succeed. After all, they were his women. Besides, resources were extremely scarce now. Only he possessed an inexhaustible supply, and crucially, his strength was absurdly high, giving him the ability to protect his assets. Therefore, if they wanted to live well, they couldn't leave him. Xiao Ran believed Su Qingmei and the others wouldn't betray him. Of course, confidence was one thing, but caution was still necessary. It was always right to be careful. Xiao Ran checked the time, entrusted Xia Chuqiu to the care of the 9 women, and then set off on his hovercraft, heading back to the West Mountain Sanatorium, also known as Hope Camp. This time, he wanted to gather more information. Lu Yong and his group had conducted so many experiments. They must have a lot of data he could use as a reference. Half an hour later, he arrived outside Hope Camp. He put away the hovercraft, put on his helmet, and walked in. So what if someone saw him? Who could possibly recognize him? Xiao Ran entered the camp and headed straight for the building that housed the infected. Hope Camp had secretly exposed survivors to the toxic hail, deceiving everyone by claiming it was an airborne virus requiring quarantine. In reality, it was to see if they would become evolved. Xiao Ran had destroyed the administration building, but this quarantine building remained intact. Fortunately, although Xiao Ran had eliminated those birdmen, Lu Yong and his men had quickly returned and restored order. At least the patients in the quarantine building had food and water and hadn't perished due to lack of management. There were even a few nurses here. When they saw Xiao Ran, they naturally tried to stop him, but he simply bent a steel bar with his bare hands, and the nurses wisely backed down. Xiao Ran had the nurses bring him the experimental data, and he examined it carefully. To date, 1082 people had been experimented on here, but only a mere 3 had successfully evolved, a success rate of less than 3 per thousand. As for the fate of these 3 evolved individuals, the records didn't mention it, but given the methods of Lu Yong and his lunatics, they had likely been killed and had their abilities absorbed. What about the remaining 1,000+ people? About 90% had died, and about 10% showed no change, remaining ordinary humans. But even if they survived this ordeal, they would still be silenced by Lu Yong's group. In terms of proportion, the number of successful evolutions was almost negligible. If cosmic rays can induce evolution, then theoretically, even if people survive this harsh winter and overcome starvation, at most only 10% will survive in the end. And among that 10%, only a little over 1% will become evolved. There were still over 100 patients in the quarantine building. Xiao Ran was very interested and examined them one by one. Under his spatial perception, the minute changes in their bodies couldn't escape his senses. A new discovery. Xiao Ran looked at one person. Inside this person's body. How to describe it? It was like a river, a strange energy gathering in the brain, forming a vortex. And at the center of the vortex was something like a seed. Xiao Ran was again at a loss for words. Was this an energy body? The strange energy was converging, seemingly trying to solidify into a seed, but it kept failing. A theory sprang into Xiao Ran's mind. Did successful evolution occur when the energy body condensed into a seed? He called a nurse over and had her pull up the detailed records for this patient. The man's name was Li Xiangqian. He had been infected 10 days ago. According to the experimental data, patients here rarely survived past 10 days. So, based on experience, wasn't this Li Xiangqian at a critical life or death point? Xiao Ran kept observing him. When he had nothing else to do, he practiced his spatial banishment. The maximum range for this ability was 15 meters. Before absorbing Lu Yong's ability, it had been around 10 meters. Banishment could create a 5 by 5 by 5 meter cube. Xiao Ran could also compress the size of this space. There was no lower limit. With precise control, he could make it the size of an atom. Moreover, Xiao Ran could simultaneously cast several banishment spaces, but their total volume could not exceed 125 cubic meters. 125 cubic meters was quite large. Theoretically, if people curled up, a 1 cubic meter space could fit several individuals. But even if it was just one person per space, Xiao Ran could banish 125 targets simultaneously. The larger the banished space, the greater the ability consumption, and vice versa. However, the number of banished spaces did not affect the ability's consumption. This was incredible. Suddenly, the monitor beside Li Xiangqian's bed started beeping erratically. Xiao Ran quickly looked over. He saw the energy within Li Xiangqian's body go completely berserk. Bang! Before Xiao Ran could do anything, the man exploded. He literally exploded. Flesh and bone flew everywhere, splattering the entire room. Evolution failed. He belonged to the 90%. He hadn't made it into the 10% survival chance, let alone become an evolved. The nurses, accustomed to such sights, put on protective suits and went in to clean up. Xiao Ran picked up the records again and found 3 more people who had also reached the critical point. He moved these 3 individuals into the same room. Why? Firstly, for easier observation. Secondly, he had a little idea. What was Xiao Ran up to? He wasn't just observing these 3 patients. He was trying to intervene. Perhaps he was the only one in the world who could. His spatial perception, combined with spatial cut, gave him the means. Intervene with what? That energy seed. Xiao Ran guessed that if this energy seed could successfully coalesce, it would mean a successful evolution. Otherwise, it would be a failure. So, intervention was a possibility. He decided to act immediately. Inside the brains of all 3, the energy seeds were stubbornly refusing to form. The moment they began to coalesce, they'd disintegrate, forcing the process to restart. However, the energy within their bodies was constantly increasing. After a certain number of failures, the energy intensity would surpass their physical limits, causing them to explode. If the energy seed successfully coalesced, could they then control the power within them and become espers? Known outcomes included a 90% chance of failure, explosion, and a 0.3% chance of success, becoming an esper. But what about the other, roughly 10% of cases? Those who neither became espers nor kicked the bucket? How did that happen? For now, it was a mystery. Xiao Ran decided to step in. He used spatial cut to influence the energy seeds. However, he immediately felt the pressure. His spatial cut was currently only strong enough to slice through flesh and tendons. The energy within the 3 individuals was too potent, easily overwhelming and dispersing his ability. Xiao Ran's interference was limited, but even a slight influence was better than none. Half an hour later, beads of sweat were trickling down Xiao Ran's forehead, but he showed no signs of giving up. Among the 3, 2 of them had energy seeds that were clearly uncontrollable. His spatial cut was instantly overpowered upon intervention. But the 3rd person was different. Xiao Ran noticed this individual's energy seed was teetering on the brink of formation. It just needed a little push from him. So, he focused all his attention on this person. The energy seed grew more and more condensed. Suddenly, it emitted a brilliant light, violently sucking in all the surrounding energy. But in the next instant, the seed shattered into countless fragments, merging into every cell of the man's body. Xiao Ran saw that these cells had been transformed. Although he seemed no different from an ordinary person right now, his potential, his upper limit, had been drastically raised. Therefore, as long as this person trained consistently, his physical capabilities would soar, making him a standout among ordinary humans. Isn't this just like when I was first reborn? After his rebirth, even without absorbing any other abilities, Xiao Ran's physical constitution was already peak human. Lu Susu had praised him for surpassing 99% of humanity. If Xiao Ran were to say it now, it wasn't just 99%, but at least 99, 99.99999999999%. Had this person successfully evolved. Bang! Bang! Just then, the other 2 met their grisly end. Their bodies exploded, splattering the 3rd man from head to toe in blood and gore, which abruptly jolted him awake. Holy crap, the 3rd man cursed, bolting upright in his bed. He was a man around 30, with a sleazy look about him, standing only a little over 165 centimeters tall. According to his file, his name was Guang, 31 years old, but there was no record of what he did before the apocalypse. It was the apocalypse, after all. Who cared what you did before? At first, he was shocked and terrified, but his expression quickly turned contemplative. After about 5 seconds, he let out a bizarre cackle. Clenching his fist, thousands upon thousands of steel needles, each over a foot long, suddenly erupted from his body. Like a porcupine. Ha, I'm not dead, and I have superpowers. I feel like I have endless strength. This world is mine. Guang climbed out of bed and pushed the door open, haphazardly wiping his face a couple of times. The mess of bone fragments and blood was incredibly uncomfortable. 2 nurses were standing at the door, about to put on protective gear to clean up, when they were startled by the blood-soaked man emerging. Caught off guard, they both screamed. Guang glanced at the 2 nurses, and lust immediately flared within him. They were both quite attractive. He didn't know why his desires were suddenly so intense, but he couldn't care less. I've got superpowers now. What's there to be afraid of? I can kill whoever I want, take any woman I desire. Who's going to stop me? This is the apocalypse. What's there to fear? Come on, let's play, he cackled. Play what? A voice came from behind him. A man. Guang whipped around to see a man nearly a head taller than him, looking to be under 30. Standing side by side, the difference between them was stark. The newcomer was tall and well-built, though his face was obscured by a helmet. And Guang? Short, stout, and sleazy-looking. Does height even matter? Look at the times we're in. I have immense power. I can dominate everything. Even the most beautiful women will grovel at my feet. Are you looking to die? Guang, brimming with confidence from his newfound power, had become incredibly arrogant, looking down on everyone. He stared at Xiao Ran, a cruel smile slowly forming on his lips. Maybe I'll kill someone for fun. He'd always had such thoughts, but naturally, he never dared act on them before, fearing retaliation. But now, he strode toward Xiao Ran. All he had to do was grab the man, and his steel needles would instantly protrude, skewering him through and through. What a delightful way to die. Xiao Ran sighed and made a gentle pressing gesture with his hand towards Guang. Still trying to act mysterious? You think I'm scared of you? Guang scoffed. He strode toward Xiao Ran. But after just one step, he faltered. His left leg suddenly lost all strength. Before he could adjust, his right leg also gave out, and thump, he collapsed to his knees before Xiao Ran. The meridians in his knees had been destroyed, so naturally, he couldn't control his legs. Fortunately, he quickly propped himself up with his hands, avoiding a faceplant. But in doing so, it looked for all the world like he was kowtowing to Xiao Ran in greeting. Holy crap, Guang cursed, utterly bewildered as to why he had suddenly fallen to his knees. Xiao Ran chuckled. Why the sudden kneeling, my loyal subject? Fuck you, asshole. Guang shot back without thinking. The guy wasn't exactly refined. Cussing came as naturally to him as breathing, so he didn't even realize what was happening before he started spouting garbage. Xiao Ran didn't bother arguing with someone like that. He just found it boring. Say what you will about Liu Yong and his crew. They might have been nuts, but at least they had personality. Way more interesting than the idiot in front of him. Xiao Ran had expected that showing off a bit would feel good, but there wasn't even a flicker of satisfaction. Maybe he was going about this the wrong way. What if the scene were different? Say, Guang had already become the overlord of this camp, and Xiao Ran came alone to challenge him. First, Guang's men would mock him. Then Xiao Ran would show his power and one-shot Guang to everyone's shock and awe. That might have been more satisfying. Maybe. But there was no way Xiao Ran was going to wait around for that scenario to play out. He gave a faint smirk and activated Spatial Sever again. Guang had only just awakened his powers. A jolt of dread hit him, a primal sense that something was about to go horribly wrong. But he had no idea what to do. His eyes went blank, and just like that, he dropped dead on the spot. His brain had been sliced into mush. Xiao Ran walked over, pressed his hand down, and absorbed Guang's power. It was another full unit of energy. No change to the spatial gate or banishment abilities, but his spatial perception range and severing radius had both increased by a meter. A small gain, honestly, nothing like before, when even that crazy woman or people like Feng Pingping had given him 3 full units. And after taking out Liu Yong and his whole gang, he'd racked up nearly 30. That had nearly overloaded him. Still, every bit counts. If cosmic radiation really would force people into evolution, then human numbers would dwindle even more. Only a small percentage would survive, and, among them, a few percent might become evolvers. 1 in 1,000 wasn't much, but a few in 100? That was significant. In the future, out of every 100 survivors, there could be several evolvers. The world would undoubtedly become dominated by them. Xiao Ran scanned the area. Every day now, a batch of people would reach the 10-day critical point. But with Liu Yong and his group gone, no new test subjects were being delivered. Once this current group was used up, that would be the end, unless he chose to push things forward himself. He thought about it for a moment, and decisively gave up on the tempting idea. Sure, he could artificially create more evolvers. Even with low odds, sheer numbers can make up for it. With 1,000 people, you might get 1 to 3 evolvers. What about 10,000? A million? How many could he produce then? But Xiao Ran still had his limits. He never set out to be a good guy, but he had no interest in being outright evil either. He only killed when provoked, or when the target was rotten to the core. Like the Chong family. Like the lunatics in Hope Camp. Xiao Ran always operated through negotiation and deals, never coercion. It was practically compulsive at this point. Still, he didn't see anything wrong with it. You had to have a line you wouldn't cross. Without one, you weren't a person, You were a beast. And Xiao Ran still wanted to be a person. He didn't want to become a beast. He'd used people like you, Fei, for experiments because they'd come at him with murderous intent. If they were going to die anyway, he might as well get something useful out of it. The patients currently undergoing testing were already in the process. There was no reversing it. So he had no qualms watching from the sidelines. But to actively commit evil, that was a different story. Xiao Ran glanced at the main building of the sanatorium. There were still a lot of people inside. But now that Lu Yong and his crew were gone, how were those people going to survive? He shook his head and walked off without another thought. Once outside, he took his hovercraft and headed back to Qing Phone Garden. Then, he went to check on Xia Chuqiu. There was no energy stirring in her body yet. But that didn't mean she wasn't evolving. Xiao Ran had observed plenty of test subjects. The latest group had been sent 3 days ago, and none of them had shown energy movement at first either. It wasn't until the 4th day that any signs appeared. So whether Xia Chuqiu was evolving or just running a fever, he'd have to wait another day to know for sure. In the meantime, Xiao Ran walked the dog, worked out, and especially practiced his use of banishment. He was starting to really get the hang of it. Physical-type evolvers were tough to deal with. Their speed was insane. Even if you had danger sensibilities, you often couldn't react in time, or you wouldn't even know where the attack was coming from. But banishment changed that. If danger struck, he could just banish himself. It would look like he was still standing there, but in reality, he'd be outside the physical plane entirely. With that, Xiao Ran could face them head-on. Normally, tracking a speedster with spatial perception was like trying to spear a fish. You needed pinpoint precision. But banishment? It was like casting a net. That 5x5 by 5 meter space made a huge difference. A powerful offense, a reliable defense. This ability was incredible. After some training, Xiao Ran wandered through the estate. The Chong family might have been monsters, but they did have an impressive library. Every kind of book imaginable, some ancient texts too, even stuff like the Shui Jing Zhu and the Siku Quan Shu. As he passed by, he saw Yuan Tong sitting by the window, completely absorbed in a book. A true scholar and teacher through and through. Her character was solidly built. A night passed. Another new day dawned, but the weather showed no signs of improving. The temperature, as if ailing, hovered around minus 40-odd degrees, stubbornly refusing to climb even a bit. Xiao Ran was already used to it. After breakfast, he first checked on Xia Chuqiu. After scanning her with his spatial sense, he couldn't help but frown, because Xia Chuqiu's body actually showed energy flows. This confirmed his suspicions. First, Xia Chuqiu had truly begun to evolve. Second, cosmic rays could indeed directly trigger human evolution without needing to be hit by the toxic hailstones. It was just that if one was only exposed to the normal radiation in the air, the onset of evolution would be much later, unlike the toxic hailstones, where contact meant it started immediately. Either live or die. Was this good news? 50-50, perhaps. Everyone, whether they wanted to or not, had to embark on the path of evolution. This was a grand event of universal evolution, but only a few per thousand would be the lucky ones. 10% would survive, and the vast majority would perish. Over at Hope Camp, out of over 1,000 people, 3 had become ability users. This didn't confirm the success rate was 0. 3%, the sample size was too small. It only indicated one thing. The chances of becoming an ability user were extremely low. Xiao Ran told Su Qingmei and the other women about his discovery. The women were all apprehensive, a mix of anticipation, excitement, and fear. Did they want to become ability users? Yes, of course they did. This was the apocalypse, after all. They didn't aspire to become overlords, but having abilities would at least give them a bit more security. After all, Xiao Ran couldn't be by their side every moment, and Xiao Ran was just one person. As one person, could he look after everyone? So, having abilities would naturally boost their confidence. But the failure of this evolution had a staggering 90% chance of death. This terrified them. It was a gamble with their lives. Xiao Ran thought for a moment and said, "You don't need to rush right now. If it's not direct contact with the toxic hailstones, relying only on the accumulation of those invisible rays in the air, it will likely be a lengthy process. By then, I should have more experience." There were still many test subjects at Hope Camp. He could definitely use them for practice. If he couldn't save them, he lost nothing. If he did save them, he could even accumulate some good karma, right? So, he went to Hope Camp again. He would go to Hope Camp for the next 6 days. After 6 days, all the test subjects would have passed their 10-day mark, either succeeding or failing. They wouldn't still be bedridden and incapacitated. He set off. Arriving at Hope Camp, he still put on his helmet to avoid being recognized. What was wrong with being a little careful? Apart from this inpatient building, most of the people in the main building had already left. The camp wasn't supporting them anymore, so why would they stay? If it weren't for being intimidated by Xiao Ran's terrifying strength, they wouldn't have left so quietly. Instead, they would have stormed the inpatient building. At least a few nurses here wouldn't have escaped their clutches. But now they didn't dare. Although Xiao Ran had never shown his face, who couldn't guess he was the formidable person who had killed Birdman and his crew? Too dangerous to provoke. Xiao Ran, on the other hand, brought some food and water for the nurses and patients. At least for the next 6 days, he needed all these people to stay alive. Today, a total of 13 people reached the 10-day critical period. Xiao Ran became quite busy. He placed all 13 of them in one room, then activated a spatial sense and used spatial cutting to perform surgery on them. By noon, all 13 people had finished their evolution. 7 dead, 6 alive, but not a single one became an ability user. Previously, when Hope Camp let these test subjects fend for themselves, the survival rate was only 10%. But now it was close to 50%. This showed that Xiao Ran's surgery was very successful. I really can interfere with evolution. Today was only my second attempt, and I've already raised the survival rate from 10% to nearly 50%. If I practice a bit more, could I raise the success rate to 80%, 90%, or even 100%? If it could reach 100%, then even if Su Qing Mei and the others couldn't become ability users, at least they wouldn't die. I'll come back tomorrow. Xiao Ran left, and when he returned to Qingfeng Garden, he arrived just in time for lunch. In the afternoon, he saw he still had some time left. He couldn't just sit at home and waste it. Anyway, the crisis at Hope Camp was resolved, so it was back to the old routine. Time to collect oil. However, Xiao Ran made a change. He would only take one person with him each time he went to collect oil. Why? It could be used to confuse any enemies they might encounter. These days, even nobodies could make a comeback. With a stroke of good or bad luck, one might end up sheltering a former superstar, right? So, if you went out with one stunning beauty, others would just think you got incredibly lucky. But if you went out with a whole group of them, then others would definitely be suspicious. Without some strength, how could one possess so many top-tier beauties and still be able to support them? They would naturally become wary, making it inconvenient for Xiao Ran to act as a hidden menace and ambush people. Besides, it was also a way to cultivate their relationships. Today, Xiao Ran took Zhou Yunsu. Her green tea efforts had won her the top spot, so naturally, some tangible rewards were in order to show for it. Sure enough, when Xiao Ran announced he was only taking Zhou Yunsu out today, the green tea was overjoyed, while the other women were all eager, their competitive spirits clearly ignited. Very good. This was exactly the effect he wanted. Xiao Ran and Zhou Yunsu, fully equipped, then went out and boarded the hovercraft. Off they went. The two of them traveled across the vast expanse of Tai Lake. After about half an hour, they saw the shoreline. Numerous commercial housing buildings stood there. It was hard to miss them. They went ashore and soon found a gas station. Same old routine. First dig through the snow, then collect the oil. Job done. On to the next one. Because they had set out in the afternoon, Xiao Ran decided to call it a day after collecting from only 2 gas stations to avoid a sudden fog appearing and trapping them outside. Although it wouldn't kill them to be trapped, why stay on the hovercraft when there were beds at home? However, on their way back, they saw a large commercial complex. Let's go. Time for some $0 shopping, Xiao Ran said with a smile. Okay. The green tea was also a little excited. Though she had her green tea moments and a certain catty flair, she had always been a good girl at school, never having done anything illegal. So, $0 shopping was a very new experience for her. It wasn't about whatever odds and ends they might find, but enjoying the shopping process itself. Girls just love to shop, shop, shop. And shopping without spending money was even better. The two of them went over. The heavy snow had buried them all up to the 3rd floor. However, Xiao Ran didn't even need to break a window. They found that a 3rd-floor window had already been smashed open. Not only that, but tables and chairs inside had been arranged to form steps, allowing easy access to the floor after climbing in. So, this place had clearly been visited before, and someone had even thoughtfully made steps. But Xiao Ran had already scanned with his spatial sense. There was no one within a 61-meter radius at least. Wow, there's a slide. Zhou Yunsu pointed excitedly at the slide, stretching from the 5th floor all the way down to the 3rd. Bouncing like a child, she exclaimed, "Good big brother. I want to play on that one." She was so giddy. She really did look like a little girl. Naturally, Xiao Ran couldn't say no. He nodded. Go ahead. But Zhou Yunsu wasn't planning to climb to the 5th floor by herself. She dragged Xiao Ran along with her. Once they reached the top, the two of them hugged tightly and slid down together. Whoosh, straight down to the third floor. Zhou Yunsu, however, clung to Xiao Ran's chest and refused to get up. She nuzzled against him for a bit before chirping. I want to go again. Go ahead, Xiao Ran replied. This time, though, he didn't join her. Instead, he started gathering supplies. Turns out there were quite a few luxury shops on this floor. Xiao Ran didn't care whether the items were useful or not. He took everything. With the amount of storage space he had, there was no reason not to. Out of habit, he activated his spatial awareness ability every few seconds. Given his current level of power, using it at that rate would last him for several days with no issue. He was in the middle of collecting gold. Useless now, but perfect for gifting to Su Qingmei and the others. He wouldn't want to be decked out in gold and silver, looking gorgeous. But just then, his spatial awareness picked up movement. 14 people had climbed in through a broken window. They moved like they knew the place well, like they'd been here before. Xiao Ran immediately stopped what he was doing and rushed toward Zhou Yunsu. Zhou Yunsu was still playing on the slide. The kind of kiddie slides obviously held no interest for her, but this one ran from the 5th floor all the way to the 3rd. Each floor of them all was over 4 meters tall, nearly 5. So even though it was just 2 floors, the drop was higher than in a typical 3-story apartment building, which made for quite the thrilling ride. Every time she slid down, she screamed out loud, her cheeks flushing with excitement. "Ah!" she screamed as she shot out of the slide tunnel. She had just gotten her feet when she froze. 14 men stood not far ahead, staring at her. If it had been Su Qingmei, she would have grabbed the sharpest thing nearby and tried to intimidate them with a fierce glare. But not Green Tea. Her expression immediately turned delicate and helpless. In a soft, trembling voice, she pleaded, "Please, don't hurt me." That sweet, almost syrupy tone could melt bones. The 14 men were clearly stunned. They'd come here like they always did to scavenge supplies, never expecting to run into a woman. And not just any woman. This one was drop-dead gorgeous. Even with her layers of clothing, her curves were unmistakable. Her body was so perfect it felt unreal. "Wait, aren't you Zhou Yunsu?" One of the men suddenly blurted out. Zhou Yunsu glanced at him, but couldn't place the face. Not that it mattered. With practiced sweetness, she asked, "You know me, big brother?" The guy looked to be in his late 20s. At her question, his face turned sour. "I chased after you for months and gave you at least 100 grand worth of gifts, and you don't even remember me?" Zhou Yunsu thought to herself, "Please, there's so many rich kids who send me stuff. I only care about the top of the top. I don't waste time remembering second-tier trust fund babies." Still, Green Tea played her part perfectly. Her eyes welled up with tears, and her voice quivered with heartbreak. "Did I do something wrong to make you so angry?" The man looked ready to rant some more, but a large hand suddenly smacked him on the head. He stiffened immediately, and whatever anger he had vanished on the spot. The one who hit him looked around 30, tall, well over 6 feet 3 inches, with a python tattoo curling around his neck. His eyes were fixed on Zhou Yunsu, but he addressed the younger man. "You know her?" "Yeah." The younger guy said quickly, "That's Zhou Yunsu, one of the top campus belles." There was another one, more classically pretty, he added, but not nearly as sultry as this one. When the tall man gave him a disapproving look, the guy quickly turned to Zhou Yunsu. "I'm Zhao Ming." He sounded genuinely upset. He'd spent so much money, and she hadn't even remembered his name. Then, gesturing to the tall man, he added, "This is our boss, Lu Feng." Zhou Yunsu gave a charming little "oh" and fluttered her lashes. "So, it's Brother Zhao. I do remember you." The name Zhao Ming stuck with her. It meant lighting, and she recalled his family was in the lighting business. They pulled in a few $100 million a year. No wonder he could afford to spend tens of thousands on her over a few months. Zhao Ming was still seething, but watching her flirt so gracefully, he couldn't even bring himself to stay mad. Especially not with Lu Feng right there. And clearly, Lu Feng was very interested in Green Tea. Zhao Ming didn't dare make another move. He wasn't just backing off, he was already preparing to call her sister-in-law. The thought made his stomach twist. Because yeah, he wanted her too, badly. He knew exactly how hot her body was. That waist-to-hip ratio? Unreal. Some women had ribs removed for that kind of figure and still didn't come close. And she had an amazing chest on top of it. But was he stupid enough to cross Lu Feng? Before the world ended, Zhao Ming had been a trust fund kid everyone envied. Now, just another lapdog trying to stay alive. One wrong move, and he'd be discarded like trash. "Zhou Yunsu, our boss Lu Feng is no joke," Zhao Ming said, hoping to impress her on his behalf. Lu Feng hadn't made a move yet, and Zhao Ming figured it was because green tea had played this perfectly, activating every competitive instinct in a man. Normally, Lu Feng would just take what he wanted. But now, he was going to show off first. Oh, Zhou Yunsu tilted her head, eyes wide with fake curiosity. What makes him so amazing? That sparkle in her eyes hit Lu Feng right in the ego. She wasn't just pretty, she understood men. He liked that. A lot. Zhao Ming sighed internally. She'd basically secured her place as Lu Feng's woman. He didn't stand a chance. Biting his lip, he forced a smile. Our boss is like Superman. Superman? Zhou Yunsu gasped, looking both impressed and slightly skeptical. Lu Feng couldn't resist. His body cracked and groaned as he began to transform. His already massive frame grew even larger, now towering at over 7 feet. His muscles bulged like they were carved from stone. His skin darkened, not just in color, but in texture. It looked more like toughened leather than flesh. He reached out and grabbed Zhao Ming with one hand, then effortlessly tossed him into the air like he weighed nothing. I can transform, Lu Feng said proudly. When I do, my strength, speed, and defense all go through the roof. Stick with me. I can protect you. I can give you the best life possible. Wow, you're amazing, big brother. Zhou Yunsu clapped her delicate hands together, then gave him a teasing look. But I already have a husband. What? Lu Feng exploded in anger. In his fury, he forgot to catch Zhao Ming. With a sickening thud, Zhao Ming hit the ground hard, knocked unconscious. Fortunately, it was only a 4 or 5 meter drop from the first floor. At worst, he'd just break a few bones. But Lu Feng paid no attention to this underling. What good was this rich, pretty boy, other than sucking up? If he died, he died. Superhumans were rare these days, but was it hard to find a brown-nosing lackey? He glared at Zhou Yunsu, somewhat irritated. Oh, so you actually have a husband. Didn't Zhao Ming say she was the campus belle of Su University? Did university students get married so early these days? Fuck, someone got to her first. Shit, Lu Feng cursed under his breath. But then again, Zhou Yunsu was so alluring. She probably hadn't been a virgin even in high school. Where's your husband? Tell him to come out. I'll have a little chat with him. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to hand his wife over to me. Zhou Yunsu giggled and pointed to the side. Over there. Lu Feng and his men all looked. Sure enough, someone seemed to be walking out of the darkness. They all shone their flashlights in that direction. It was a young man, not yet 30, about 8 meters tall and rather handsome. Hubby, Zhou Yunsu cooed, her voice sweet enough to melt bones. Lu Feng felt a prickle of desire. He said to Xiao Ran, Kid, I'm very interested in your wife. How about you give her to me? He glanced around, then grabbed Zhao Ming from the ground, one hand on his neck, the other on his left ankle. With a powerful jerk, squelch, blood sprayed everywhere as Zhao Ming was brutally torn in two. Ark! Zhao Ming shrieked. It turned out, being torn in half didn't mean instant death. He wore an expression of utter disbelief. Lu Feng had actually ripped him apart just to show off his strength. Damn it, I didn't deserve this. A few seconds later, he coughed up blood and died, his eyes wide open in a permanent stare. He truly died with a grievance. When the rabbit dies, the fox grieves. The other 12 henchmen turned deathly pale. Of course, it might have just been the gruesome, terrifying sight. Only Lu Feng remained unfazed. He said to Xiao Ran with a sinister look, Kneel. Having some fun with this alluring beauty right in front of Xiao Ran seemed like a pretty good idea too. Xiao Ran smiled faintly and retorted, And where are you from? Lu Feng seemed incredulous. He paused for a moment before saying, You're actually questioning me? If your ears are working, then yes. Xiao Ran nodded. Motherfucker. Lu Feng raged. I just tore a living man in half, and you're not even a little scared? You dare to question me? Are you an idiot or something? He roared and charged at Xiao Ran like a rampaging bull. Just as he was about to reach Xiao Ran, a cold smirk played on Lu Feng's lips, and a single horn suddenly sprouted from his forehead. This was his killing move. All this beating around the bush, everything he had done, was to lull Xiao Ran into a false sense of security, to make him think he was just a brainless brute. Zhou Yunsu had been far too calm. So, either the woman was an idiot, or she believed Xiao Ran possessed enough strength to protect her. He preferred to believe it was the latter. Therefore, initially, he had indeed been showing off his strength in front of Zhou Yunsu, a primal male instinct. But once Xiao Ran appeared, he began to strategize against him, deliberately acting like a reckless fool. How many idiots could actually survive this long in the apocalypse? But just as he reached Xiao Ran, a powerful premonition jolted his heart. Danger! 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 He roared, stomped his feet hard, and actually shattered the sturdy floor tiles. Both feet sank deep into the ground, forcefully halting his charge. So, you're a superhuman too, Lu Feng said, word by word. Otherwise, how could Xiao Ran, clearly unarmed, trigger such a strong sense of crisis in him? But what's your ability? Lu Feng was very curious. Why do I feel danger from you when you're just standing there? Xiao Ran chuckled. You look like a brute, but you're surprisingly not brainless. He certainly wouldn't tell Lu Feng what his power was, not even if Lu Feng was about to die the next second. Why waste his breath? Lu Feng's eyes darted. With a sudden roar, he spun around and lunged towards Zhou Yunsu. If Xiao Ran exuded such a strong sense of danger, what about Zhou Yunsu? This delicate little beauty. If he took her hostage, even if he couldn't force Xiao Ran to surrender, he could at least make him hesitate. He grabbed Zhou Yunsu with one hand and used her as a shield. Let's see what Xiao Ran would do then. A beauty? Huh. Compared to her, his own life was far more important. Zhou Yunsu's face paled in terror, because Xiao Ran was still behind Lu Feng, and he hadn't even moved. It's over, she thought. I'm going to fall into this beast's hands. A triumphant smirk spread across Lu Feng's face. Once he had this woman, if Xiao Ran didn't kneel and surrender, he'd take her right in front of him. What man could endure such humiliation? Seeing Zhou Yunsu right in front of him, he reached out to grab her. Huh. An incredulous expression appeared on Lu Feng's face. His hand had clearly reached Zhou Yunsu, but it strangely passed right through her. No, his entire body even passed through hers. It was as if she was just a holographic projection, not a real person at all. How could this be? Lu Feng skidded to a halt, then spun around rapidly. Unwilling to give up, he grabbed at her again. Swish, swish, swish. His large hand repeatedly passed through Zhou Yunsu's form. She truly seemed like a projected light effect, definitely not real. I get it. Lu Feng suddenly burst out laughing. Your superpower is creating illusions. So, this woman doesn't actually exist. She's just an illusion you created. Such a genius. If Zhao Ming weren't dead, he'd surely be screaming about how unfair it was for an illusion to be an acquaintance. So, Lu Feng continued, his voice filled with dawning realization. The you I'm seeing might not be the real you either. Perhaps there's a deadly trap behind you. That's why I felt such a strong sense of danger when I charged at you. Because you're a fake. It looked like I was charging at you, but I was actually jumping into a trap. Lu Feng laughed even more smugly. I've seen through all your tricks. Xiao Ran was a bit stunned. With an imagination like yours, it's a real shame you're not writing novels. So, how do you plan to break them? He asked with a smile. How to break it? How to dispel it? Lu Feng was stumped. Right? Realizing it was an illusion was one thing, but how to actually break it? Xiao Ran smirked, done with pointless talk. With a mere thought, whoosh, a sonic stone shot out. Lu Feng was aghast. What the hell? Before he could even process it, the stone was right in front of him. His ability was beast transformation, but he could only assume a rhino form. In this state, he possessed astonishing speed, strength, and defense, on par with physical-type ability users, perhaps even with some enhancements. For example, a rhino's hide is incredibly tough, almost bulletproof. He retained this trait after transforming. But against a sonic stone, he had zero confidence. Yet, the stone was already upon him. How could he dodge? He had no choice. With a roar, he threw his hands up to meet it. He wasn't Lu Yong, who had absorbed over 10 different abilities. Lu Feng was all-natural, his strength far inferior. So, when his hands met the stone, he couldn't deflect the force at all. Crack, crack. His bones snapped instantly. But the sonic stone, barely impeded, continued its deadly trajectory. Danger sirens blared wildly in Lu Feng's mind. A fat lot of good that did. Realizing the danger was one thing. How to neutralize it was another entirely. Bang! The sonic stone streaked past. Lu Feng vanished on the spot. A hole appeared in the distant wall, and a chilling wind howled in. Holy crap! Xiao Ran was speechless. Lu Feng was utterly useless, instantly smashed into a bloody, mangled pulp by the sonic stone. The impact was so direct that the stone lost almost no momentum, punching a hole clean through the wall before flying off. Sigh. Now he had to go find it. What a pain. Xiao Ran sighed again, released Zhou Yunsu from her banishment, and then turned his gaze to the 12 underlings. Clearly, these were ordinary people. 3 had wet themselves in fear, 1 had fainted outright, and the remaining 8 were trembling uncontrollably. Xiao Ran offered a faint smile. Where are you all from? He asked, pointing to one of them. Vouvet. The man's voice was dry and raspy. We're from a Suzhou Bay underground mall. Xiao Ran paused. What place is that? It's a large commercial complex, but it's built underground. A man beside the first, evidently more articulate, quickly elaborated for his companion. It's not as cold down there, and we've gathered a lot of firewood that we keep burning day and night. Survival isn't an issue. Xiao Ran's interest was piqued. He gestured towards the hole in the wall. Are there more people like him? Yes, the articulate man stated, selling them out without a shred of hesitation. There are several. Our boss is Cheng Qian. Brother Feng was one of his most capable subordinates. Xiao Ran uttered an "oh," then asked, aside from Abelot, superpowered individuals, do you have guns? The articulate man, still unhesitating, replied, we do. We've raided several police stations. We have handguns, submachine guns, sniper rifles, and also things like smoke grenades and tear gas canisters. But the boss keeps them locked up. They haven't been distributed to us. This was perfectly understandable. Currently, at least 9 out of 10 ability users were still vulnerable to bullets. Even someone as formidable as Xiao Ran could be taken out by a single bullet if he failed to react in time. Only someone like Lu Yong, a physical type who had also absorbed several other abilities, could potentially withstand a bullet head-on, with it at most penetrating a few centimeters of flesh without hitting a vital organ. That kind of resilience wasn't something one could simply envy. Xiao Ran continued his questioning, having different men answer. Gradually, he formed a more comprehensive picture of the faction in the Suzhou Bay Underground Mall. This group was indeed sizable. They had 9 ability users. Oh wait now. The leader was Cheng Qian, whose ability was rather peculiar. He could merge with the earth and transform into a giant stone colossus, 6 or 7 meters tall. A single charge from him could demolish a villa, and he was impervious to bullets and blades. Xiao Ran suspected Cheng Qian's ability must have severe limitations. Otherwise, he'd be virtually invincible. Even so, transforming into a 6 to 7 meter tall stone giant, impervious to weapons and possessing immense strength, was already incredibly difficult to deal with. Cheng Qian also had a second in command, Lu Qi, whose ability was harder to define. He could perceive targets through the most minute vibrations in the air. For instance, if someone approached, no matter how light their footsteps, they would inevitably cause air vibrations. He could sketch out the approaching person from these subtle disturbances, discerning their appearance with perfect clarity. Essentially, this man served as a living radar and alarm system for the underground complex. With Lu Qi present, launching a sneak attack on this faction would naturally be extremely difficult. Furthermore, it was an underground commercial complex, not only vast, but also with an intricate network of passages. This made Xiao Ran's previous tactic against Hope Camp, blowing up the entrance and waiting for them to dig their way out, practically impossible here. Crucially, Cheng Qian's ability was likely Earth-related. While others might struggle to dig themselves out if buried, it was probably a different story for him. Xiao Ran nodded. You can leave. Huh? The 12 men were all stunned. They hadn't expected Xiao Ran to be so lenient. The few who had fainted had already begun to stir and regain consciousness. We were just plotting against your wife, and just because we answered your questions honestly, you're letting us go? What a saint. Quick, let's get back and report. The boss and the others are extremely interested in superpowered individuals. Even though Lu Feng died here, reporting this intelligence will still earn us merit. Haha, what an absolute idiot. Your wife will soon be taken by many men, one after another. They exchanged glances, nodded in unison, and turned to depart. But after they had taken only a few steps, the first 5 men in the line abruptly vanished. What was happening? The remaining 7 men froze, then slowly turned back, their faces deathly pale as they stared at Xiao Ran. Xiao Ran shrugged. Why are you looking at me? It wasn't my doing. Who else could it be but you? The 7 men were on the verge of tears. Just moments ago, they were sneering at him for being a saint, and now they were instantly, brutally proven wrong. This man wasn't a saint at all. He was terrifyingly devious. Spare us. All 7 dropped to their knees. This was a monster capable of annihilating Lu Feng in an instant. They stood no chance against him. Begging for mercy was their only recourse. Xiao Ran pondered for a moment, then retrieved a handgun and offered it to Zhou Yunsu. Do you dare? If Zhou Yunsu were to become an ability user in the future, she was destined for a life of combat, a life that involved killing. If she lacked that ruthless edge, that killer instinct, then possessing abilities would be pointless. She might as well remain sheltered at home. Zhou Yunsu hesitated for a mere half-second before she took the handgun. She raised the weapon, aiming it at one of the kneeling men. Beauty, please, I beg you, don't kill me. The man kowtowed repeatedly, his forehead thudding against the ground. I have elderly parents and young children at home, all of them depending on me to bring back food. Please have pity on me. My daughter is only 7 years old. If I die, my wife will have no choice but to sell herself and my daughter. My daughter might starve to death. Bang! A flash of light erupted from the muzzle. Then, the man who had been begging for mercy stared wide-eyed, a bloody hole in his forehead, as he slowly fell backward. Zhou Yunsu's hand trembled slightly, but her grip on the gun was firm. She said coldly, "If I had fallen into your hands just now, would you have spared me?" She aimed the pistol at the remaining men. She was just a green tea, not some naive saint. Let's get them. Seeing this, the men roared and charged at Zhou Yunsu. Not playing by the rules, are we? Xiao Ran chuckled, his right leg lashing out in a series of lightning-fast kicks. Thump, thump, thump. All the men were sent flying. People who posed no threat, of course, could be used for Zhou Yunsu to practice her skills and build her courage. If these men had been espers, Xiao Ran would have definitely finished them all off immediately. Zhou Yunsu quickly adjusted her aim and fired several more shots. Bang, bang, bang. However, the first man had been kneeling motionless in front of her. These men, on the other hand, were a bit farther away and rolling on the ground, making them much harder to hit. After all, Zhou Yunsu was a complete novice who had never touched a gun before. She emptied the entire clip in one go and then pouted coquettishly at Xiao Ran. "I'm so clumsy. I only managed to kill one person. Big brother, you won't blame me, will you?" Xiao Ran could see that beneath her art, there was an undeniable revulsion. Therefore, her green tea expression looked somewhat unnatural. That was more like it. Who would feel happy after killing someone for the first time? No one. Even after killing many times, no one would feel that way. Unless they were a homicidal maniac, a lunatic. Zhou Yunsu was using this act to cope with the negative emotions of killing. Xiao Ran smiled, took the pistol back, and without even looking, swish, 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 several bullets shot out from a spatial gate, finishing off the men who were still struggling for their lives. "Let's go home." Xiao Ran first found Lu Feng's body and absorbed his powers. Then, the two of them boarded the hovercraft and headed back towards Qingfeng Garden. However, not long after they set off, the side effects of Xiao Ran absorbing the powers kicked in. Zhou Yunsu keenly noticed the change in him, and the young woman immediately sat in his lap. By the time they returned to Qingfeng Garden, Xiao Ran was refreshed and invigorated, while Zhou Yunsu's eyes were alluringly hazy, her body tender and weak. It was just a bit cold. Well, what could they do? Although the hovercraft had a cabin and could have a stove, its heating effect naturally couldn't compare to a real house. Upon entering the mansion, both of them went to take a shower first. The other women weren't suspicious at all because it was cold outside, and taking a shower to warm up right after returning was perfectly normal. After their showers, dinner was served shortly. It was, as usual, a lavish meal. Xiao Ran ate while lost in thought. Another faction formed by espers. What did the emergence of this trend signify? In the future, such factions would become more numerous and powerful, gradually filling the current power vacuum. Therefore, it would be normal for a situation similar to warlordism to arise. Perhaps it would eventually lead to a struggle for supremacy among a few super factions, vying for control of the Central Plains. Maybe one faction would achieve unification, but it would be impossible to return to the pre-apocalyptic era. How could those with powers possibly submit to ordinary people? He was getting ahead of himself. Xiao Ran reined in his thoughts. The future direction was a grand trend. Even if he could become invincible in Sioux City, even suppressing all Esper factions there, could a single city influence the entire country, or even the world? The great tide of the future would inevitably surge forward like a torrential flood, unstoppable. He only needed to worry about his own turf. Sioux City Bay Underground Commercial Complex. He had specifically checked the map. This commercial complex wasn't far from Qingfeng Garden, only about 20 kilometers away. No wonder they had encountered them on their oil run. Should he pay them a visit? From the perspective of strengthening himself, every Esper was his prey. However, wouldn't that make him an enemy of the whole world? Besides, what was the purpose of becoming stronger? It was so that others wouldn't bother him, allowing him to live freely and peacefully. To seek power purely for power's sake would deviate from his original intention. "All right, as long as you don't provoke me, I can't be bothered to seek you out," Xiao Ran said to himself. Actually, he had another concern. Based on current intelligence, this faction wasn't weak, and they had someone who could sense external intrusions, making it very difficult to ambush them. Xiao Ran never fought battles he wasn't confident of winning. Therefore, even if he decided to move against Cheng Qian's faction, he would only do so with absolute certainty. After dinner, all the women went to work out. Maintaining their figures was a daily requirement for them. Even though Xiao Ran had said that a little bit of flesh was actually good, that curviness had its own appeal, none of the 9 women listened. Fine then. Xiao Ran also went to train his powers. Under his spatial perception, every place and every detail within the entire building could not escape his senses. This feeling was truly marvelous, as if he had become an omnipotent god. Han Yun is a bit irritable. Her period will be a day late. Su Xiaomei's assets seem to be growing. Could be thanks to my massages. Teacher Yu has had some endocrine imbalance lately. She needs some conditioning. He felt like a highly skilled, old traditional Chinese doctor. Observation, listening and smelling, inquiry, palpation. Now he only needed a glance to make a diagnosis. Then, he focused his attention on the warping of his spatial gate. Although he currently possessed spatial banishment, that ability consumed a lot of power. His spatial gate, however, was different. Opening, maintaining, and closing it consumed no power at all. Therefore, modifying the spatial gate was the true path. Keep it up, keep it up. But this was clearly an arduous task with a long way to go. Another night had been spent in vain. Around 10 p.m., you went to bed? The people of Su province had no nightlife, not even before the apocalypse, and certainly not after. Xiao Ran was used to sleeping early and waking up early. Since Su Qingmei and the other 9 women lived in Su City, they were naturally accustomed to this routine as well. So, when the apocalypse arrived and evening entertainment became impossible, the 9 women didn't find it hard to adjust. Su City had always been like this. A night passed. After breakfast, Xiao Ran, as usual, first checked on Xia Chuchio's condition. The energy within her body had grown stronger again, but the seed had not yet begun to form in her mind. It seemed it would definitely take the full 10 days. Then, you went to Hope Camp again. Today, 17 people had reached the 10-day critical point. Following the usual procedure, Xiao Ran had the nurses move all these people into one room, and then he began his intervention. You can't form the seed? I'll help you form it. That tone sounded a lot like a high-ranking official from the Western Depot. Xiao Ran mused himself while carrying out the manipulation. 2 hours later, the results were in. 8 dead, 9 alive. An improvement. Xiao Ran nodded. Unfortunately, he still hadn't managed to cultivate any new espers today. Xiao Ran was quite melancholic. He hoped for another esper or 2 to appear. If they showed any hostility towards him, he'd eliminate them immediately and reap their powers. See, he was still a man of principle. If you don't mess with me, I won't mess with you. Unfortunately, there were no espers. The chances of them appearing were truly too low. As usual, Xiao Ran left some supplies behind and then returned to Qingfeng Garden. Same old routine, collecting fuel in the afternoon. Today he brought Su Qingmei along. His 2 top-tier empresses naturally deserved preferential treatment. However, after securing the first gas station, Xiao Ran spotted a large, white building towering in the distance. It was a hospital. An idea struck him, and he steered the hovercraft towards it. He had indeed prepared a good amount of medicine, but the kind one could stockpile in large quantities before the apocalypse was naturally over-the-counter drugs. Even if some pharmacies had lax management and prescription drugs could be bought, the quantity couldn't be too large. So, if he wanted to hoard a large amount of medicine, now was the time. A hospital would definitely have some. Xiao Ran didn't think he needed much medicine himself, but these were strategic resources, and one could never have too much. Su Qingmei, naturally, had no objections, as cold and aloof as a great iceberg. Soon, they arrived at the hospital. Same old method, climb in through a window. Are you looking for medicine? Su Qingmei asked. Xiao Ran nodded. Su Qingmei chuckled. Then I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. Most medicines have temperature requirements for storage. The temperature now drops to -50 or 60 degrees Celsius. Any medicine would probably be ineffective by now. Why didn't I think of that? Xiao Ran felt slightly embarrassed. Nobody's perfect. He couldn't possibly think of everything, anticipate every detail. But since they were already here, they might as well look around. The 2 walked through the empty hospital, each footstep echoing as if they were in a haunted house. However, Su Qingmei showed no trace of fear. TSK, someone who's been in prison really is different. Xiao Ran was a little disappointed. Su Qingmei glanced at him, then leaned closer, even taking his hand and wrapping it around her waist. Scared, she said. Xiao Ran couldn't help but laugh. This woman was truly interesting. Was she scared? Not in the slightest, of course. But she had seen through Xiao Ran's thoughts and deliberately used his hand to hold her, acting coyly to satisfy his male chauvinism. Who said she could only be cold and aloof? It was just that this girl's acting skills were mediocre. Her performance was a bit stiff and awkward. Still, the thought was what counted. Xiao Ran. Su Qingmei suddenly stopped, looking at him with an intense gaze. I want to start evolving immediately. Huh? Xiao Ran was surprised. He hadn't expected her to make such a decision. Why? Su Qingmei had clearly thought about it for a long time. She immediately said, "You're very strong, but you can't always stay at home to guard us. The moment you leave, we'll be in danger. Guns and such are enough to deal with ordinary people, but against espers, it's not enough. So, you want to gain powers to protect the others," Xiao Ran said, following her train of thought. Su Qingmei smiled. "To protect my sister. The others are just incidental." That was the honest truth. Xiao Ran thought for a moment. "It's possible, but you'll have to wait a few days. Let me get some more practice in. That way, even if your evolution fails, I can still save your life." Okay. Su Qingmei nodded. Among the 9 women, her personality was the most tenacious and decisive, which was why Xiao Ran said she was the most like a soldier. The two continued their simple collection work while talking, gathering medicine. They didn't need any instruments. Xiao Ran's spatial perception was far superior to CT scanners or MRI machines. And when it came to surgery, his spatial cutting ability could surpass any master surgeon. Suddenly, Xiao Ran stopped in his tracks. Su Qingmei also halted. "Is something wrong? Or did your shoelace come undone?" "Huh, you're teasing me now." Xiao Ran smiled. "There are living people here." Su Qingmei couldn't help but raise her sharp, striking eyebrows. "It's been almost 2 months since the apocalypse began. Is there any food in the hospital?" Xiao Ran thought for a moment. "There are vending machines, which can provide some food and water. We don't have to worry about electricity. Hospitals definitely have generators. After the cataclysm began, as long as they cut power to most areas, it could supply electricity for 2 months. Even half a year wouldn't be a problem." "How many people? Can you tell if they're espers?" Su Qingmei asked again. Among the 9 women, she was the most vigilant. 7 people, 2 men and 5 women. "It's unclear if they're espers," Xiao Ran said. When espers evolved, there was a strong surge of energy within their bodies. But once the evolution was complete, this energy would integrate into every cell, making it undetectable even with spatial perception. Or perhaps, Xiao Ran just hadn't found the right place or method to detect it yet. "Have they detected us?" Su Qingmei asked. Xiao Ran shook his head. "No. Are you planning to make contact with them?" Su Qingmei was very curious. "Let's leave it to fate," Xiao Ran chuckled. "We'll just stick to our plan." The two continued forward without deliberately trying to silence their footsteps. So, after walking a bit further, a door ahead, from which light was seeping, suddenly opened. Several people emerged, all holding flashlights, and shone them towards Xiao Ran and Su Qingmei. Su Qingmei immediately shone her flashlight back. Though both were flashlights, the difference in power could be immense. Hit by Su Qingmei's beam, the people opposite were all blinded by a white glare, unable to see anything. "Friends, let's all stop shining our lights," someone from the opposite side said, being the first to aim their flashlight at the ceiling. Everyone else followed suit. Now, everyone could see clearly, or rather, Su Qingmei could now see them clearly. Indeed, 7 people had come out of the room, 2 men and 5 women. The 5 women were either nurses or doctors. Although they were wrapped in thick bedclothes, glimpses of their uniforms could be seen at the edges. The 2 men were also heavily wrapped, but they seemed to be wearing normal clothes, making it unclear if they were doctors or orderlies. However, the 5 women were all quite pretty, at least above average. They were just wearing too much to see their figures. The 2 men were different. One was quite thin, but the other was astonishingly fat, almost like a ball. Looking at his face, he was at most in his early 20s, with a round face that gave an impression of being simple, honest, and harmless. To be that overweight in his 20s, this person clearly didn't manage his physique. "Huh, what brings you here?" the thin man asked. He was around 30, with a scar running from his left eye to the corner of his mouth. Clearly not someone to be trifled with. Xiao Ran smiled. "We have a relative who's sick and needs medicine." "Oh, then you've come to the right place," Scarface said. "We're all doctors and nurses. Come on, come inside. Tell us about the patient's condition so we can make a diagnosis." He gave a meaningful look, and all 7 retreated back into the room. It was clear that the other 6 were very afraid of him, their faces showing fear. Watch out, that Scarface man is definitely bad news. Su Qingmei whispered to Xiao Ran, patting her waist. She was carrying a gun. Xiao Ran nodded, and the two of them moved forward, stepping through the door. It was an office, now converted into a makeshift lounge. Several beds, likely taken from patient rooms, had been moved in, piled with thick mattresses. 3 heaters were running inside, which explained why the temperature was tolerable. My name is Wen Yujian. I'm the operator from the server room, Scarface said enthusiastically. These 6 are either doctors or nurses. Ha! I'm the only one who isn't. How embarrassing. And what are your names? Xiao Ran smiled. I'm Xiao Ran, and this is my wife, Su Qingmei. Hearing the word wife, Su Qingmei seemed momentarily dazed, then quickly regained her composure. The chubby man spoke up. I'm Liang Bo, like Liangshan Marsh from Water Margin. No idea why my dad was so obsessed with Water Margin back then to give me a name like this. Hello? Nice to meet you. He extended both hands to shake Xiao Ran's, and as he drew closer, he blinked urgently at Xiao Ran. While they shook hands, he whispered in an extremely low voice, You two should leave quickly. Wen Yujian is not a good person. Although the voice was incredibly soft, Su Qingmei was too close to Xiao Ran not to hear it. She couldn't help but glance at the chubby man. Judging by the expressions on the 6 people's faces when Wen Yujian had ordered them into the room with a single sentence earlier, this man was clearly very domineering and likely ruthless. Otherwise, the 6 wouldn't have shown such fear. In these times, there was no law to restrain anyone. Primal instincts were unleashed, like a raging flood or a ferocious beast, utterly savage. Xiao Ran nodded. Only then did the chubby man release his hand and step back, glancing nervously at Wen Yujian. He breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the other man's expression hadn't changed at all. Wen Yujian asked, What's the condition of your loved one? A fever, a persistent high fever that won't break. Xiao Ran briefly described Xia Chuchio's condition. 2 of the women immediately showed thoughtful expressions. They were the only 2 doctors. A high fever, reaching 42 degrees Celsius. Normally, that would require emergency resuscitation. No, even if she were revived, her brain would likely be damaged. They began to discuss it. Xiao Ran, naturally unconcerned by their discussion, turned to Wen Yujian. How have you all survived for so many days? At these words, everyone except Wen Yujian shivered. Wen Yujian chuckled. Well, it's a hospital. Plenty of supplies. There's a large cafeteria and lots of vending machines. We just smashed them open and took what we needed. If that's the case, how come only you guys survived? Xiao Ran asked again. Wen Yujian gave a dismissive laugh. How would I know? Su Qingmei couldn't hold back. The hospital's food supply is finite. To have survived this long, did you kill the other survivors? Wen Yujian glanced at her, then grinned. Sweetheart, even if you're pretty, slander isn't right. Su Qingmei didn't bother wasting words with him. She pulled out her gun and aimed it at Wen Yujian. Are you going to talk or not? Seeing her draw the gun, Wen Yujian actually seemed to relax, a smile playing on his lips. Is this what you rely on to venture outside? Haha. And here I was, playing along with your act for so long. I thought you actually had something special. But now, His face was full of disdain, as if Su Qingmei's gun were merely a toy. He's not ordinary, the chubby man suddenly stammered, shrinking away from Wen Yujian. He's like a Superman. He can shoot lasers from his eyes. Oh, so there are powers like that, huh? Xiao Ran was slightly surprised. Wen Yujian stared coldly at the chubby man. You damned fatty, you dare betray me. You've harmed too many people. I couldn't stand by any longer. The chubby man retreated further. Wen Yujian sneered, his gaze fixed on Su Qingmei. Sweetheart, I advise you not to do anything rash. That damn fatty is right. I can shoot lasers. I guarantee I'll sever your finger before you can pull that trigger. Although missing a few fingers wouldn't stop me from having my fun with you. Being crippled is a bit unsightly, after all. So, be a good girl and put the gun down. Nearby, the 5 women were trembling even more violently. Xiao Ran smiled faintly. Don't be afraid. Shoot him. Su Qingmei had hesitated for a split second, but after hearing Xiao Ran's words, all doubt vanished. She immediately squeezed the trigger. AI. Wen Yujian sighed, his eyes instantly turning crimson. 2 beams of light actually shot out. How fast is the speed of light? Once fired, it's impossible to dodge. As the light beams lanced out, Wen Yujian's eyes looked as if they had been scorched, a terrifying red. The 5 women all covered their faces, unable to watch. The scene would be brutal. They had witnessed it more than once. Bang! A gunshot also rang out. Why was there still a gunshot? When Yu Jian should have severed Su Qingmei's finger with his laser. How could she fire without a finger? Everyone looked over in unison. They saw Wen Yujian staring at Su Qingmei in disbelief, then looking down at his own chest, where a bloody hole had shockingly appeared. He'd been shot. How was that possible? He had clearly fired his laser first. Although it took time for him to gather energy for the laser, the entire process was a mere half-second, and he was 100% certain he had fired first. Once the laser was fired, no one could possibly dodge it. So, why was Su Qingmei still able to shoot? Within 5 meters, his laser could cut through a 20-centimeter thick steel plate. So, after these 2 beams were fired, even the gun should have been sliced apart. How had he gotten shot? What the F? He opened his mouth, only managing a few words before his body began to sway. The shot was accurate, right through his heart. Even if someone with powers had a constitution superior to ordinary people, they couldn't survive a pierced heart. At most, their last breath might linger a tiny bit longer, dying a few seconds or even minutes later. The great villain is dead. The great villain is dead. The chubby man shouted excitedly, rushing over. But just as he was about to dash out from behind Xiao Ran, his expression suddenly twisted into a ferocious snarl. He opened his mouth, and whoosh, a terrifyingly cold wind blasted out. His skin also became visibly different from a normal person's, as if turning into ice, becoming translucent. He was actually launching a sneak attack on Xiao Ran. Such an apparently harmless-looking chubby man, actually sneak attacking from behind. And shockingly, he was also a powered individual. This cold was terrifying, possibly around 100 degrees below 0 Celsius, like liquid nitrogen. Exposed to such an extremely low-temperature airflow, who wouldn't be instantly frozen solid? That damn fatty, playing the wolf in sheep's clothing. He and Wen Yujian were in cahoots, one overt, the other covert. But he was a truly excellent actor. Xiao Ran smiled. So, you finally show your true colors. The fatty's sudden move caught Su Qingmei completely off guard. What kind of act was this guy putting on? A real wolf in sheep's clothing. Just moments ago, during his introduction, he'd clearly warned Xiao Ran and her to be careful, saying Wen Yujian was no good. Who would have thought he'd be the one to stab them in the back? So unexpected. Xiao Ran. Su Qingmei shrieked, too late to fire her weapon. But Xiao Ran merely offered a faint smile and calmly turned. A biting wind gusted, yet it seemed to have no effect on him. And indeed, the hem of his clothes hadn't stirred in the slightest. Son of a bitch. Wen Yujian spat out a final curse, his head slumping to the side as he died, consumed by bitter resentment. He had desperately longed to see Xiao Ran frozen into a block of ice before he met his end. Now, he died seething with infinite fury. The fatty's brow furrowed. The simple, honest expression he'd worn moments ago vanished completely. He was still incredibly large, but he no longer looked comical, only sinister and terrifying, like a ferocious wild animal. It's not surprising you could neutralize my attack, but how did you know I would attack you? When Yu Jian had clearly fired a laser just moments ago, yet there wasn't a single mark to be seen. Xiao Ran must have absorbed it somehow. So, it wasn't theoretically strange that the freezing breath had also been absorbed. But the crucial point was, how had Xiao Ran sensed he was a threat? He played the part of being terrified of Wen Yujian from start to finish, even warning Xiao Ran about him. And you were still on guard against me? The fatty found it utterly unbelievable. Su Qingmei was also stunned, feeling a pang of shame and a shiver of fear in retrospect. She hadn't harbored the slightest suspicion towards the fatty. Thank goodness for Xiao Ran. Otherwise, even with her powers, she would have been caught completely off guard. She couldn't help but turn to Xiao Ran, her gaze filled with a burning desire for answers. Xiao Ran smiled. He might have wrapped a bedroll around himself on the outside, but underneath he's wearing a down jacket. That means he couldn't have been stuck in this hospital from the start. He came from home. This hardly needed explaining. The apocalypse began on June 1 ST. Who would wear a down jacket to a hospital at the beginning of summer? So, the fatty must have arrived at the hospital after the world ended. And in those initial days, the constant toxic hailstorms would have made it impossible for him to get here early on. So, the likelihood of him and Wen Yujian just coincidentally meeting here at the hospital is extremely low, Xiao Ran continued. That leaves only one explanation. They're working together, a pair of crooks roaming from one place to another, using their powers for villainy. The fatty's expression soured. I'm wrapped up so tight. How could you tell I had a down jacket on under all this? Spatial perception, my friend, Xiao Ran thought with a smirk. I not only know every layer you're wearing, I even know you're lopsided down there. The fatty was understandably furious. All that effort, all that acting. Had it all been a complete waste of time from the very beginning? Xiao Ran smiled. Forget the fact that the fatty was suspicious. Even if he hadn't been, would Xiao Ran ever trust someone so readily? He always had a couple of aces up his sleeve, Spatial Gate and Banishment. So, even facing enemies from both front and rear, he felt no fear. Since these two wanted to play games, he'd simply pick them off one by one. The outcome so far, when Yu Jian was dead. Perfect. Seeing Xiao Ran merely smile without answering, the fatty took a deep breath. In each of his hands, an ice spear rapidly materialized. His power was cryokinesis. He could not only exhale an instantly lethal freezing aura, but also condense atmospheric moisture into weapons like these ice spears. Seeing this, Su Qingmei raised her gun and fired at the fatty. Bang! The bullet flew, normally a blur invisible to the naked eye, but to her astonishment, and everyone else's, they could see it. It was slowing, decelerating visibly. By the time it reached the fatty's chest, the bullet had stopped dead, coated in a thick layer of frost. It then clattered to the floor, pulled down by gravity. What was this extreme cold? It was a state where energy ceased to exist, where even protons and electrons would halt their motion. Absolute zero. Of course, the cold the fatty generated didn't reach that extreme, but it was still potent enough to strip a speeding bullet of all its kinetic energy. This is also possible. Xiao Ran clicked his tongue in mild surprise. Other ice ability users, like Song Hui and Youth No. 9, were more or less cut from the same cloth, their differences mainly boiling down to raw power. But this fatty was something else entirely. Exhaling freezing air, using extreme cold to nullify attacks. There was no common ground. Keep going, he told Su Qingmei. What were the limits of this fatty's power? Could he maintain this freezing field indefinitely? Bang, bang, bang. Gunfire erupted continuously, but not a single bullet reached the fatty, each one clattering uselessly to the ground. Xiao Ran, however, observed keenly that under this sustained assault, the fatty's speed in materializing his ice spears was clearly diminishing. So, whether it was generating the ultra-low temperatures or forming the ice spears, both actions drained the fatty's energy. And it looked like the drain was significant. Despite this, the fatty finally managed to fully form his ice spears and charge toward Xiao Ran. Clearly, he perceived Xiao Ran as the greater threat. A sound judgment. But then, the fatty lurched to a sudden halt, his brow furrowed in bewilderment. His instincts screamed at him, "Don't go any further, or you'll die." Yet, he could see nothing in his path. What was happening? He experimentally tossed an ice spear forward. Swish! It had barely traveled a foot before it vanished without a trace. It was as if he'd thrown a snowball into boiling water. It simply dissolved, leaving nothing behind. "What is your power?" He couldn't stop himself from asking, even though he was almost certain Xiao Ran wouldn't tell him. Take a guess. Sure enough, Xiao Ran had no intention of satisfying his curiosity. With a mere thought from Xiao Ran, whoosh, a length of rebar shot out at sonic speed. Why rebar and not one of his sonic stones? Because they were inside a hospital. If he blasted away with a sonic stone and destroyed a load-bearing wall, bringing the whole building down, wouldn't he end up burying himself alive? True, banishment could keep him from being crushed, but he'd be immobile in that state. And once his power ran out, he'd still be trapped in the debris. Worse, if the spot he occupied with banishment had originally been solid wall, what would happen when he phased back into reality? Would his flesh meld with the concrete? The very thought was horrifying. Sonic rebar was different. Its destructive force was far more controlled. Even if it struck a load-bearing wall, it would likely just punch clean through, not bring the whole thing crashing down. The fatty didn't even have time for his expression to register shock before he desperately activated his power at full strength. Freeze! Freeze, damn you! Thwack! But the sonic rebar was too fast, its kinetic energy too immense. Even with the fatty exerting all his power, he couldn't stop it. It tore straight through his left shoulder. However, the intense cold also made the rebar incredibly brittle, and it shattered into several pieces on impact. The fatty stumbled backward, a foot-long shard of rebar protruding gruesomely from his left shoulder. Xiao Ran looked curious. Where did you come from? Was it possible these two, Fatty and his partner, were from some faction? He really wanted to know. Fatty gave a bitter laugh. We came from the Jingfu complex. We already ran out of food there. Got here 2 days ago. I'll tell you everything. Just spare my life, please. Xiao Ran shook his head. No, but I can make your death quicker. A savage glint flared in Fatty's eyes. He roared and charged at Xiao Ran in a desperate bid for survival. Too bad for him. A spatial gate opened right in front of him, forcing him to stop and switch directions. But no matter how many times he changed course, he found himself back where he started. "You're messing with me," he yelled furiously. Even though his steel rod was still stuck in his shoulder, it hadn't hit anything vital, not even bone. It looked gruesome, but wasn't seriously life-threatening. More importantly, he could freeze the wound to stop the bleeding, even numb the pain entirely. He'd faked weakness, hoping Xiao Ran would drop his guard. But clearly, Xiao Ran wasn't buying it. Xiao Ran smiled faintly. "You weren't telling the truth anyway." Fatty narrowed his eyes, his expression returning to calm. "How'd you know?" Su Qingmei stared at Fatty, slightly dazed. One moment he looked like a savage demon, the next he was howling like a dying dog, and now he was oddly composed again. So many extreme personalities in one man. Was he schizophrenic? Xiao Ran smiled again. "From the moment you two tried to set us up." "What?" Fatty couldn't believe it. Xiao Ran spoke calmly. "With powers like yours, you should have acted superior. But when you found us, one of you immediately played the villain, while the other pretended to be the good guy hiding in the background. Why go to all that trouble? Clearly, you knew there were other powered people out there. You weren't unique or even rare. In fact, you've likely used this trick on others before. It must have worked so well that the moment you spotted us, you pulled the same routine again. Am I right?" Fatty was stunned. After a long pause, he slowly nodded. "Anyone still alive in this hellhole is probably a power user. So yeah, we set you up. Never thought it'd backfire so badly." Xiao Ran shook his head. "Even if you'd attacked us right away, the outcome wouldn't have changed. Right now, his strength far outmatched most power users by a wide margin. Just the Sonic Stone and Sonic Steel Rod alone were enough to devastate enemies." "Tell me honestly," Xiao Ran said flatly. "Which faction are you with?" Fatty's eyes shifted, then he suddenly grinned again, looking harmless and simple. "Since you're so curious, fine, I'll tell you. Me and Old One used to follow Boss Jiang. Boss Jiang took control of the steel mill. You know how valuable a place like that is in this kind of weather, right? Everyone nearby wanted to join him. He used to be a worker there, and after awakening fire-based powers, he became really strong. In just over a month, our group grew into a major faction with thousands of people and more than 20 power users. But 7 days ago, we were attacked. The ones who hit us were led by that bitch Wei Lily. She took over a hot spring resort nearby and had her eyes on our supplies. They launched a surprise attack in the middle of the night. No warning, no declaration. We lost. Boss Jiang was killed by that bitch with her own hands. That's when I found out. Powers can be stolen. No wonder Boss Jiang was strong. Wei Lily was even stronger. Old One, and I didn't dare keep fighting. We ran. Along the way, we pretended to be ordinary people. Managed to infiltrate several groups. Me and Old One took them all out, had our fun, filled our bellies, and eventually made it here. Didn't expect that after escaping that bitch Wei, we'd get wrecked by you instead." Xiao Ran was a little surprised. 2 power user factions had already fought a full-blown battle? He hadn't heard a word about it. Then again, with no internet anymore, even the most brutal fights 10 kilometers away wouldn't be known. And even if someone saw something, who could they tell? He'd been focused entirely on the Hope Camp these past few days, hadn't had time to explore. "Where's Wei Lily's hot spring resort?" Xiao Ran asked. Fatty answered right away. "Xiaoyang Mountain." Most so-called hot spring resorts were scams, boiler-heated water piped through a system to fool people. But this one was real. Xiaoyang Mountain did have hot springs. No wonder it became a settlement. Any warm place would attract people these days. The steel mill did. Underground shelters did too. What kind of power does Wei Lily have? Xiao Ran asked again. He could tell Fatty really hated Wei Lily, or rather, the faction she represented. Understandable. She destroyed his home and left him a homeless fugitive. If he didn't hate her, that'd be odd. And if Xiao Ran were to fight her, Fatty would probably love to see it. You want to know about Wei Lily? Sure. Fatty was all too eager now. I only saw bits of her fight with Boss Jiang. Every time he breathed fire at her, she would. Fatty seemed to struggle for the right words. Or maybe it was fear. His hands started trembling and his pupils shrank. Yeah, probably fear. After a moment, he continued. That bitch would just open her mouth and swallow all the fire he blasted at her. And she'd blast it back at him. Eventually, she swallowed him whole. A few minutes later, she spat out a pile of bones. He was trembling even more violently now. Xiao Ran was shocked. That sounded a lot like a spatial portal's function, absorbing and reflecting attacks. But Wei Lily did it with her mouth. And the bones afterward? That was a whole different level. She always uses her mouth? He asked. Yes. Fatty nodded. Now he was desperately trying to redirect trouble toward Wei Lily. He wanted Xiao Ran to fight her to the death. After all, once he learned that powers could be absorbed, he understood no power user could resist the temptation to grow stronger that way. Just like him and Wen Yujian, even on the run, they still hunted and killed other powered people. If you're not strong enough and someone else gets stronger, you're just meat on the chopping block. So no matter whether you're ambitious or not, everyone's trying to get stronger by any means necessary. Xiao Ran looked at the fat man. Any last words? The fat man grinned. I'm not going down without a fight. I'm going to kill you. Everything I said earlier was just stalling. If I die here, and one day you manage to kill that bitch Wei Lily, give her my regards from me and Big Boss Jiang. Xiao Ran didn't respond. Talking before killing someone? That's just giving them a chance to turn the tables. The fat man's face twisted back into a feral snarl. He let out a roar and exhaled a blast of frigid air. A sharp wind howled, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Xiao Ran cast a banishment spell on himself and Su Qingmei. Then, with a thought, a barrage of supersonic rebar launched out. Whoosh, 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 and pierced the fat man like a living pincushion. No matter that he had powers, getting hit in vital spots meant only one thing: death. Xiao Ran dispelled the banishment. Bang, bang, bang. Gunshots rang out. The doctors and nurses nearby all collapsed, clean bullet holes between their brows. Su Qingmei had done it. Xiao Ran was slightly surprised and turned to look at her. You're really something. Su Qingmei replied coolly. They saw what you could do, or at least part of it. Even if they had no real chance of escaping, it's safer this way. Sometimes I could be the bad guy for you. Xiao Ran was unexpectedly touched. A woman willing to kill for you. What more could you ask for? He smiled slightly and absorbed the powers of the fat man and Wen Yujian. Then, gripping Su Qingmei's chin, he asked, You and your sister, are you really full sisters? Su Qingmei rolled her eyes with a look of annoyance. That joke's not funny. I wasn't always like this, she said. But after spending so long in that prison, even if you couldn't bring yourself to kill a chicken before, you'll eventually turn ruthless. Starting to get scared of me. Xiao Ran didn't answer. Instead, he said, You're not like your sister. She was the one who suffered back then, but you're the one who killed. I believe, even if the knife had been in her hand, she wouldn't have had the guts to use it. It takes courage to kill. Su Ran might be clever, but she wasn't cut out to be a fighter. If she ever awakened powers, she'd be suited to support work in the rear, not the front lines. Ask her to kill? Yeah, right. Forget it. He never planned to turn her into a fighter anyway. Better she stays a pretty little flower. That fits his no strings attached, trade-only approach just fine. The two continued searching through the hospital, but found no other survivors. Only freshly killed corpses. Clearly, the fat man and Wen Yujian had already cleared the place, killing every man and all the unattractive women, leaving behind 5 passable-looking ones for their own twisted pleasure. Those women probably only had a few days left. Once the men got bored and prepared to move on, it'd be their turn to die. With how terrified they were of Wei Lily, there's no way they'd leave any loose ends alive to spill their secrets. They did find a decent stockpile of medicine, but many of the drugs required either refrigeration or specific room temperatures, none of which were being met. So most of it was useless. Xiao Ran decided to hit the construction market the next day. He needed to restock on weapons, supersonic rebar, iron blocks, anything useful. The more, the better. He and Su Qingmei headed back. On the way, the side effects of absorbing powers hit him, but he dealt with it calmly. By the time they returned to the mansion, Su Qingmei's hair was a mess, her face faintly flushed. It took her a while to compose herself. Nobody else noticed anything, except green tea. She had just gone out with Xiao Ran yesterday and picked up on the clues immediately. She sauntered over, swaying her hips, leaned in close to Su Qingmei, and sniffed dramatically. Well, you reek of sex. That pissed Su Ran off. She stormed over, ready to teach green tea a lesson. But green tea wasn't flustered at all. If Su Ran made a move, she'd just throw herself in Xiao Ran's arms and ruin Su Ran's image even more. Su Qingmei, however, raised a hand and stopped her sister. She looked at Xiao Ran and asked, If I awaken my powers, can I ask for a gift from you? What kind of gift? Xiao Ran replied. Su Qingmei pointed at Zhou Junsu. I want to string her up and beat her for a whole day. Don't worry, I'll avoid the face and the chest. I just want to teach her a lesson. Zhou Junsu's face went pale. She immediately threw herself at Xiao Ran. Big brother, Su Qingmei's scary. You're not exactly innocent either, Xiao Ran thought, chuckling. Of course, he wouldn't let Su Qingmei go through with it. As the head of the household, he had to keep things balanced. Su Qingmei was just trying to put green tea in her place. She walked up to Zhou Junsu and whispered in her ear, My sister only talks. I use my fists. You want to test me? Zhou Junsu wanted to clap back, but the calm look on Su Qingmei's face made her freeze. She fell silent. Good girl. Su Qingmei patted her on the butt and turned to leave. Smack! Smack! Those two swats weren't light. Zhou Junsu's eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from the sheer humiliation. But she didn't dare say a word. Green tea types always pick on the weak and fear the strong. Xiao Ran couldn't help but laugh. Su Qingmei really had Zhou Junsu wrapped around her finger. Su Ran, on the other hand, would lose her cool in a flash and get played like a fiddle. Night fell. Thick fog rolled in out of nowhere. That's when the women finally relaxed. The fog acted as a natural barrier. No one would risk wandering through it in the freezing cold. That would be suicide, except for Xiao Ran. But even if people like him existed, they were rare. The odds of one just happening upon this place were virtually zero. So, when the fog rolled in, the women instinctively let down their guard. Time to hit the gym. All 9 women went off to work out, while Xiao Ran wandered the grounds with the leopard. In truth, the leopard didn't really need walks anymore. The estate was massive. It could sprint from the bottom to the top, explore every floor, and get plenty of exercise. After playing with the leopard for a while, Xiao Ran headed for a bath. Hot water wrapped around him, and he nearly dozed off in bliss. His mind wandered to Chang Qian's faction, then to Wei Lily's group. Moving forward, the surviving forces would only grow stronger, just like a game of poison breeding, where you kill off your rivals and absorb their power. That was true in Sioux City. It would be true across the nation and across the world. His head throbbed at the thought. After taking down Hope Camp, Xiao Ran felt he had become quite powerful, enough to relax a bit, at least for a short while. However, the appearance of Chang Qian's group, along with Wei Lily's Hot Spring Hotel faction obliterating Boss Zhang's steel mill, reignited a sense of pressure in Xiao Ran. That Boss Zhang had managed to secure his top position because he had undoubtedly absorbed supernatural abilities, likely more than just 1 or 2, or he wouldn't have possessed such an overwhelming advantage. Therefore, Wei Lily, capable of defeating him, must have absorbed at least as many abilities, if not more. Now that Wei Lily had eliminated Boss Zhang, how many abilities had she accumulated in total? Was it possible she had as many as, or even more than, himself? As a faction leader, the advantage lay in being able to send out subordinates to discover and then surround and destroy other groups. Far more efficient than operating solo. Xiao Ran even toyed with the idea of establishing his own faction. But the thought of being a leader, responsible for the daily necessities of so many people, felt like too much trouble. What if I could form an alliance with an existing faction? He mused. I could use their manpower as my eyes and ears, making it much easier to find other groups of ability users. But which faction could he ally with? Seeing him alone, would they even agree to an alliance? Or would they find it more advantageous to simply kill him and seize his abilities? Apocalypse, Day 57. Xiao Ran checked on Xia Chuqiu. Her high fever persisted, but the energy intensity within her body had risen to another level. However, she was still far behind those patients from Hope Camp who typically took about 10 days to transform. It was clear she would need 10 days, possibly even longer. There was no way around it. After breakfast, Xiao Ran naturally headed to Hope Camp again. Today, fewer people reached the critical point compared to yesterday, but there were still 8 individuals. Xiao Ran treated them all simultaneously, just as before. The result? Still no new ability users emerged. However, the mortality rate had significantly decreased. 2 dead, 6 alive. This outcome was astonishing, considering that Hope Camp usually just left the patients to their fate, resulting in a mortality rate as high as 90%. Xiao Ran nodded. If he could guarantee a 100% survival rate, he could then let Su Qingmei and the others attempt to evolve one by one. It was inevitable, something they couldn't avoid. And since that was the case, evolving sooner meant they could familiarize themselves with their new abilities earlier. Around noon, he departed from Hope Camp. By now, aside from the isolation building which still housed people, everyone in the other buildings had fled. Were they just going to wait there and starve? Back at his residence, Xiao Ran had lunch. In the afternoon, he set out, as per his usual routine. Today, I'll take Han Yin, he decided. The two of them boarded the hovercraft and headed straight for Sioux City's largest building materials market. Xiao Ran planned to gather rebar and other similar supplies. Additionally, there was a gas station right next to the market, so he could also grab some fuel. This market was quite a distance away, forcing Xiao Ran to pick up the pace. Otherwise, he might not make it back home before dark, and they'd have to spend the night out in the open. It wasn't impossible, just unnecessary. But the hovercraft was designed for water travel. While it could glide over snow, its speed was ultimately limited, topping out at just over 40 miles per hour and unable to go any faster. Fortunately, this market was much closer than the Jufu residential district. In less than 2 hours, they arrived at the Nanhuan building materials wholesale market. The problem was, the place was unexpectedly bustling with activity. The entire area around the market, including the nearest few roads, had been completely cleared of snow. What did this imply? The gas station was also clear and accessible. Well, so much for that. His plan to get fuel today was definitely off. Xiao Ran stopped the hovercraft at a distance, mulling over his options. Should he press on or turn back? Clearly, the building materials market had transformed into a settlement. In this post-apocalyptic world, what did the formation of a settlement signify? It meant there were undoubtedly ability users present. Xiao Ran always preferred to plan thoroughly before making a move. Rushing headlong into the territory of an unknown faction? Forget it, he thought. Better to come back, next time fully prepared. Just as he was about to head back, he spotted 2 sleds rapidly approaching, pulled by several huskies, malamutes, and Samoyeds. Have I been spotted? Xiao Ran mused for a moment. Then a slight smile touched his lips. Fine, I won't leave then. Wouldn't want to make it seem like I'm scared of you. In a moment, the 2 sleds glided over. Each carried 2 people. One steered the dogs, while the other held a gun. A rifle, no less. All 4 wore goggles and hats, bundled up tightly against the cold. None of the 4 dismounted from their sleds. Instead, they gestured toward Xiao Ran. Although it wasn't formal sign language, a little deduction made their intention clear. They wanted Xiao Ran to proceed with his hovercraft towards the market. All right then, Xiao Ran thought. You're the ones inviting me. Xiao Ran started the hovercraft and continued forward. However, since the snow around the market had been thoroughly cleared, the hovercraft had to stop some distance away. Xiao Ran and Han Yun disembarked. He certainly wasn't going to reveal his spatial ability, so he left the hovercraft where it was. Let's see if anyone dares to steal my things, he thought. Theft comes with a hefty price. Xiao Ran and Han Yun walked towards the building market. The 4 individuals from the sleds dismounted and followed behind them. Although Xiao Ran didn't turn his head, his spatial awareness was constantly active, monitoring all movements within a 64-meter radius. Furthermore, upon detecting any hint of danger, he would instantly use Banish on himself and Han Yun, a skill he had long since mastered to perfection. When it came to life-saving abilities, he naturally prioritized practicing and mastering their use. However, neither the 4 people trailing them nor anyone else in the vicinity showed any signs of aggression. After walking several dozen meters, they entered the building materials market. As they pushed open the door, a wave of warmth immediately enveloped them. The 4 people behind them were already hastily removing their hats and goggles, muttering complaints about the weather. Xiao Ran and Han Yun also removed their hats and goggles. When Han Yun shook out her thick, wavy hair, the 4 individuals who had just walked past them to the front stopped dead in their tracks, stunned. What a beautiful, captivating woman. And most strikingly, she was clean. In this day and age, aside from the top-tier leaders, who could afford the luxury of using water to wash their hair, let alone bathe? True, water from melted snow was no longer toxic, but didn't melting snow require burning firewood? In this bitter cold, firewood was a strategic resource, vital for survival and therefore incredibly precious. These 2, just who were they? The 4 men from the sled team had harbored a sliver of lust just moments ago, but now it had vanished completely. Han Yun was too pristine. Therefore, she had to be the woman of someone important. Otherwise, where would she get so much hot water to clean herself? But she truly was a rare beauty. Her looks were beyond question, breathtakingly beautiful. The key was her enchanting allure. Those captivating, watery eyes were simply soul-stirring and bone-melting. The sight of her made their hearts flutter uncontrollably. But now they all kept their gazes straight ahead, like perfect gentlemen. They truly didn't dare. How should we address you, boss? One of them quickly spoke up before Xiao Ran could say anything. He immediately added, My humble surname is Yufugue. I'm one of the security captains here. Xiao Ran chuckled. You have many security captains here? Yes, there are indeed quite a few. Yufugue nodded repeatedly, as obedient as a pug. Xiao Ran thought for a moment and said, My name is Li Lei, and this is my wife, Han Mimi. Yufugue felt these 2 names sounded somewhat familiar. but he couldn't immediately recall where he'd heard them. Could he have met this couple before? That shouldn't be possible. A natural-born seductress like Han Yun. If he'd seen her once, he definitely wouldn't have forgotten her. How strange. Han Yun, meanwhile, quickly lowered her head and covered her mouth with her hand to keep from laughing out loud. Xiao Ran, with a perfectly straight face, asked, "Are you conducting business here?" There were quite a few people around, and almost all of them were carrying bags, some even suitcases. Yu Fuguei was taken aback for a moment, then blurted out, "You don't know what we do here." "Should I know?" Xiao Ran retorted. Yu Fuguei probably scorned Xiao Ran inwardly as a country bumpkin, but he didn't dare say it aloud. He quickly forced a smile and said, "It's perfectly normal if you don't know. We've actually only just opened for business not too long ago." Clever use of "open for business," Xiao Ran thought with a smile. "I'd like to hear more." Seeing Xiao Ran's keen interest, Yu Fuguei first shot a look at his subordinates, signaling them to quickly inform their superiors, while he himself said, "This trading market was established about 10 days ago." Xiao Ran listened. The boss of this market was named Qiao Xining. He had gathered a group of people and used a megaphone to announce everywhere, inviting people to come here to trade. Here, you could sell anything and buy anything. There was no talk of what was legal or illegal. Of course, sellers had to pay rent. It wasn't expensive, just 2 jin of food per day. If it was meat, you got a 50% discount, so 1 jin was enough. At first, there weren't many people, but within a few days, business boomed, and now more and more people were coming. People like them, these security guards, had only come seeking refuge a few days ago. They could join after passing some simple physical tests. The place provided food and drink, but once employed, it was for life. Betrayal was forbidden, punishable by death. When Yu Fuguei spoke of this, he looked terrified. Because a group had feigned allegiance, then Pride opened the warehouse the very next night and fled with a large amount of food. Qiao Xining sent people after them, and in just half a day, they brought back both the people and the goods. The crucial part was, none of them were killed outright. Instead, they were stripped naked one by one and thrown into the snow, where they froze to death within minutes. They were sent out one after another. Seeing the first few freeze to death, those who follow were naturally scared to death, kneeling and begging for mercy, crying. But Qiao Xining paid them no heed at all and let them all freeze to death, one by one. Xiao Ran, of course, didn't think there was anything wrong with this approach. In these times, food is life. If you're trying to take my life, why would I be polite to you? Wouldn't that make me an idiot? Making them go out to die, one by one, was naturally intended as a deterrent. The later ones would feel increasing terror, and their desperate wails would undoubtedly send chills down everyone else's spines. Who would dare to offend again? Besides collecting rent, Qiao Xining actually had his own businesses too. For example, his seafood business. The kind that involved women. Half of this trade here was run by independent operators, while Qiao Xining controlled about 50 girls, holding the other half of the market. With just these 2 ventures, Qiao Xining propped up his power base, and the number of people flocking to him grew steadily. While they were talking, a group of people approached. Leading them was a burly man around 40 years old, with arms almost as thick as an average person's thighs. With each stride he took, those behind him had to hurry several steps to keep up. "This is our Tiangu," Yu Fuguei introduced. "Wan Haichao, Tiangu." "Wait a minute." Xiao Ran was startled. "His name is Wan Haichao." "Correct. Then why Tiangu?" I don't know either. Tiangu just told us to call him that." Just then, Wan Haichao walked up to Xiao Ran. He was a full 2 meters tall, so he looked down at Xiao Ran, stared for 2 or 3 seconds, and then suddenly broke into a smile. "Welcome. How should I address you, big brother?" It was as if a fierce tiger had suddenly turned into a kitten. This drastic change was startling and completely unexpected. The smile was so fake, patently false. Even a most naive person could see through it. Xiao Ran said calmly, "Li Lei." "Oh, Mr. Li," Wan Haichao said, his tone sounding rather uncultured, as if he'd never attended an English lesson in his life. "Are you here today to shop, sell goods, or just to take a look around?" "Just looking," Xiao Ran said. "It's our first time here, not familiar with the place." "All right, no problem." Wan Haichao kept a smile on his face. "Do you need me to arrange someone to accompany you, so Mr. Li could get a better understanding?" "No need. We'll just wander around on our own," Xiao Ran declined. Wan Haichao didn't press further. He just nodded at Xiao Ran and, surprisingly, turned and left. Interesting. Xiao Ran watched Wan Haichao disappear, then averted his gaze and said to Han Yun, "Well, since we're here, let's take a look around." "Top floor." Wan Haichao entered a room, removed a hidden camera, and tossed it to someone, saying, check this. Check, check, check. Everyone needs checking. Tiangu, do you think I have nothing better to do? The speaker was a young man, not even 20. But despite his grumbling, he caught the camera. Wan Haichao glared at him. You got a problem with that? Nope, not at all. The young man grinned, raising his hands. Countless images flickered across his eyeballs. He then put down the camera and muttered, let me see. Who exactly are you? In less than 10 seconds, he whistled. Tiangu, this one's a big fish. Wan Haichao merely raised an eyebrow. A really big one. We should go see the boss together. I think the boss needs to hear this person's information, the young man said. Are you sure? Wan Haichao was a little surprised. It was serious enough to involve the boss. Positive. The young man nodded emphatically. Wan Haichao and the young man stepped into another room. They knocked first and only pushed the door open after being given permission. The room was quite warm, though it had neither underfloor heating nor a fireplace. A small stove was burning in the center. But burning charcoal indoors without ventilation? Were they not afraid of poisoning? Coincidentally, there were two people inside. One was sitting, the other crouching. And no, don't get the wrong idea. Both were men. The seated man gave off a refined air. Even in this kind of environment, he was dressed in a full suit and wore gold-rimmed glasses, scholarly and composed. The strange part was the leash in his hand. On the other end of it was the man crouching on the floor, the leash looped around his neck. Yeah, definitely a story there. But Wan Haichao and the young man didn't give it a second glance. They were used to sights like this. Boss, we have something to report. Even a brute like Wan Haichao instinctively lowered his voice in front of the refined man. That man was Chao Xining. Eyes closed, resting, he didn't even lift his head. Speak, he said calmly. Right. The young man nodded and began. Tianji asked me to investigate someone today. I used facial recognition and found his name, Xiao Ran. Then I pulled all his financial data. Here's where it gets interesting. Neither Chao Xining nor Wan Haichao showed any surprise at the mention of facial recognition or financial record retrieval, as if it were perfectly normal. What was it? The internet was down. He hadn't even turned on a computer. So how'd he do facial recognition or data pulls? Even with the internet, those banking firewalls weren't child's play. The young man's name was Suhi. His ability allowed him to interface with satellites in low Earth orbit and extract data. Firewalls meant nothing to him. And while the network was technically down, that didn't mean all servers were offline. So he could still access what he needed via satellite uplink. Quit teasing. Just say it, Chao Xining said coolly. Though his voice was soft, Suhi instinctively shrank back. This Xiao Ran guy is something else, Suhi said. 3 months before the world went to hell, he hit the lottery. Almost 400 million. He put most of it into the stock market, bought a villa, and spent a fortune renovating it. All in all, about 80 million. By now, Wan Haichao's expression had shifted. Even Chao Xining raised an eyebrow. It gets crazier, Suhi went on. In just over 2 months, he turned his capital into over 1 billion. Then he cashed out and spent every cent on supplies. Wan Haichao couldn't hold back. Holy crap, this guy must be some big shot's secret love child or something. He must have known the apocalypse was coming and started prepping early. So he glanced at him. I did find a classified government file later. The state had some contingency plans, but they were made just 3 days before everything collapsed. This guy started prepping 3 months in advance. Does that sound possible to you? Why not? Wan Haichao scoffed. Maybe the government knew about the radiation way before, and a few people got tipped off and made their own plans. So he got annoyed. If Xiao Ran really were the illegitimate son of some high-ranking official, wouldn't he have been sent to one of the underground arcs as part of the Fireseed plan? Wan Haichao grinned smugly. That's exactly why I said he's an illegitimate kid, not someone they'd acknowledge publicly. They probably gave him money to fend for himself, build his own shelter, and stock up. Damn, that actually made some twisted sense. So he couldn't argue back. Chao Xining chuckled lightly. What if this person isn't awakened, and his power is foresight? Boss, you're a genius. So he jumped to agree. That had been his own theory as well. But Wan Haichao shook his head. All our powers only manifested after the apocalypse. Didn't we all say it was the radiation that triggered it? So how could he have had powers 3 months earlier? Good point. Chao Xining and Su, he had to admit that was a flaw in the theory. Could it really be that the brute had guessed right? That Xiao Ran was some bigwig's bastard? But something about that explanation still felt off. Boss, do you want to meet him in person? Sui asked. Chao Xining thought for a moment. No rush. We know where he lives. We can visit whenever we want. And since he's already come to us once, he'll be back. A gleam flashed in his eyes. Over 3 billion in supplies. If we got our hands on that, we could raise a whole army, he muttered. It was an absolutely drool-worthy stash. But where would he keep all that? Chao Xining mused aloud. He rented a warehouse. Suhi immediately answered. Chao Xining grinned. Let's check that warehouse first. If all the goods are there, we kill him on the spot. If not, or only some of it's there, then we take our time and play with Mr. Xiao. Understood. Meanwhile, Xiao Ran and Han Yun were walking through the construction market. This place had everything: food, firearms and ammo, lumber, gasoline, you name it. No standardized currency anymore. People mostly traded goods based on need, except for one particular industry. A man sidled up to Xiao Ran and said without a hint of shame, Hey bro, interested in some female company? Just half a pound of grain for a session. Got meat? 2 ounces is enough. Come on, take a look at the girls. Han Yun had been lagging slightly behind, taking in the surroundings, but when she heard that, she stormed up and linked arms with Xiao Ran like she was staking her claim. The man glanced at Han Yun and gave a low whistle, clearly impressed by her beauty. Then he said, Ah, so you're in the trade too? Damn, you're carrying premium stock. How much for a go? Heh, I've never seen goods this fine before. Gotta try her at least once. As he spoke, he actually reached out to pinch Han Yun's face. Smack! Xiao Ran slapped his hand away. She's my wife. The man didn't care. Everybody's selling their wives these days. Come on, bro. Don't tell me you're new here. Survival first, right? Morals come after. Still, he didn't try again. He looked down at his hand, already swelling like a balloon. Damn, what the hell? You got iron palms or something? How'd one slap mess me up like this? Get lost. Han Yun finally snapped. The man considered for a moment, then slunk off. Han Yun sighed, a wave of melancholy washing over her. In an apocalypse like this, people had become commodities. Truth be told, wasn't she the same? To survive, she had sold herself to Xiao Ran. It was just that Xiao Ran was different from other men. He treated her quite well, especially in terms of material provisions. It was impeccable. No exaggeration, the treatment she and the other 8 women received was unparalleled anywhere in the world. If she had to point out a flaw, it would be that Xiao Ran was too much of a womanizer. But this was also quite normal. With morality collapsed and order destroyed, who could be expected to adhere to monogamy? In every chaotic era, the strong naturally ruled, in which strong man would have only one woman. She had already accepted and grown accustomed to this. It wasn't that she hadn't understood this before, but now, seeing women selling their bodies for a mere half-pound of grain, she was profoundly shaken. So, in this apocalypse, people were truly worthless. At this thought, she couldn't help but grip Xiao Ran's hand a little tighter. If Xiao Ran didn't want her anymore, how would she survive? Would she, like the women here, sell herself to one man after another? The mere thought sent a shiver down her spine. MMS. Huh? Suddenly, a man's voice, filled with surprise and a hint of joy, called out. Han Yun looked over. Opposite her was a man in his 30s, decent-looking, with a bejeweled woman beside him who clearly hadn't washed her hair in days. It was almost dripping with grease. You are. She looked at him hesitantly, unable to recall who he was. I'm Ye's father, Lu Wintao. The man laughed heartily. Han Yun finally remembered and let out an oh. So it's Ye's father. Ye was one of her former students, whose full name was Lu Xinyue. Lu Wintao stared at Han Yun with a burning gaze, making no effort to hide his greed and possessiveness. After a few seconds, his gaze reluctantly flickered to Xiao Ran, first with a start, then with a look of realization. He knew, of course, that Han Yun was married. So this must be her husband. What would one be doing bringing their wife to a building materials market at a time like this? There were 2 possibilities. First, like himself, they were genuine buyers, here to purchase scarce resources. Second, they were here to sell their wife or girlfriend. As for the ratio between the two, the former was probably only 1/10 of the latter. In other words, most were here to sell, and he was more inclined to believe it was the latter. After all, ever since he first attended his daughter's parent-teacher meeting and saw the beautiful and alluring Ms. Han, he hadn't been able to forget her. It was just that before the apocalypse, he wasn't a wealthy boss, nor was he handsome enough to have the means to seduce her. Now, things are different. He had awakened an ability and was now a privileged individual in his residential complex, with just a beckon of his finger, which young woman or wife wouldn't immediately flock to him. Later, although he pledged allegiance to another, more powerful ability user, he was highly valued, and his authority remained substantial. He naturally looked down on Xiao Ran with great contempt. How desperate must one be to make their wife sell herself? However, while her selling herself could fulfill his desire, Firstly, he didn't want it to be just a one-time thing. And secondly, he had longed for Han Yun for so long that he didn't want another man to touch her. An idea struck him. He looked at Xiao Ran with extreme seriousness and an expression of utter disdain, saying, "It's not my place to say, but you're too selfish. Making Ms. Han do this kind of thing just to survive. Ms. Han is a teacher, the most respected profession, and you're degrading her like this." Having said that, he felt a little smug. No matter how Xiao Ran tried to argue, he held the absolute advantage. Finally, if he flaunted his substantial resources, wouldn't getting Han Yun to come with him be a piece of cake? Xiao Ran unwilling? Bah, believe it or not, I could kill you with one punch, he thought. Xiao Ran looked at Lu Wentao in surprise, finding him utterly baffling. He smiled at Han Yun and said, "Is there something wrong with this guy?" Han Yun was a little embarrassed and quickly said, "He's the father of one of my former students. I don't know him well." She was terrified that Xiao Ran would misunderstand. Heaven knows, she had always been very proper at school. Indeed, many colleagues and parents had expressed their admiration for her, openly or subtly, but she had never once thought of having an affair. Xiao Ran nodded, put his arm around her slender waist, and started walking forward. "Then don't pay any attention to this idiot." Idiot. Lu Wentao was stunned, then so angry he almost rushed forward to attack. But he managed to hold back. No fighting. The building materials market had its rules. Only haggling was allowed. Absolutely no physical altercations, or Chao Xining would teach you a lesson. Even a mighty dragon doesn't try to crush a local snake, and Lu Wentao couldn't even be considered a river-crossing dragon. At best, he was a pawn for one. However, his eyes glinted with a sinister malice. "Unless you don't leave the market, the moment you step out, I'll make my move," he vowed to himself. He immediately abandoned his original shopping plans and started following Xiao Ran and Han Yun, naturally afraid they would sneak away. "Honey," the woman beside him became displeased, shaking Lu Wentao's arm coquettishly. "Didn't you promise me we'd buy things today?" She wasn't Lu Wentao's real wife, just one of the women he kept. After the apocalypse, Lu Wentao's family had almost been entirely eaten by others. But when it was Lu Wentao's turn, he unexpectedly had a surge of power, awakened in ability, and successfully fought back, killing his attackers. He quickly became the leader of his entire residential complex, giving orders, no longer worrying about starvation. And whichever woman he desired would obediently come to him. However, these women were just for amusement. Take the current one, for example. She was indeed good-looking, but she was still a notch below Han Yun, especially in terms of that bone-deep, alluring charm, which she couldn't hold a candle to. It's not about not recognizing quality, but that comparison reveals all. When the two women were put together, the difference was instantly clear. Lu Wentao didn't speak, merely shot the woman a glare. She immediately fell silent as a cicada in winter, not daring to utter another peep. Xiao Ran and Han Yun walked ahead, with Lu Wentao following behind. His gaze was fixed on Xiao Ran's arm around Han Yun's waist, his eyes practically shooting flames. "I really want to chop off that dog's paw." He fumed internally. Xiao Ran acted as if he hadn't seen him and strolled through the entire building materials market. It had 5 floors. The first to 4th floors had been converted into storefronts selling all sorts of things, while the 5th floor was the residence of Chao Xining and his group, accessible by invitation only. There was also an underground garage, but with no cars now, it had been converted into living quarters for the underlings. Xiao Ran was somewhat surprised. Such a large building actually had heating everywhere, using heating pipes. Although it only reached about 5 degrees Celsius, it was enough for people to survive. But where did all this heating come from? Was there a large boiler constantly heating water? Was there that much firewood? In these times, firewood was definitely a strategic resource. Xiao Ran clicked his tongue in amazement. Indeed, any faction that managed to rise had its extraordinary aspects. "Big brother, come play with us." Just then, several women surrounded him, trying to pull Xiao Ran through a doorway, above which was clearly written Tycoon Funhouse.